Come on, Slowpoke, it's not much further.
The deeper into the woods we went, the happier I was that I'd packed my headlamp. We'd been walking for hours, and it was obvious that Glimmer was slowing down to allow me to keep up. Did she make this trip every day to see me? I reminded myself that she also made it at night, too. How sharp were her eyes? Is it much farther, Glim? I'm getting winded. Glimmer smiled at me, offering me a hand up. I was doubled over on the path, looking most undignified as I tried to keep from heaving, my backpack sitting heavy on my back. I took her hand, trying to get balance again, noticing that she wasn't even sweaty.
It's not far, come on, I'll help you.
She took my arm, folding herself against me, and suddenly I could have walked another 20 miles into the Appalachian wilderness. It was the dead of night as we went with no trail to guide us, and this was a part of the forest that I'd never seen before. Grandpa didn't like to go too deep into the woods. His legs got tired easily as the years went by, and this would have been a multi-day hike for him. The trees out here were so lush as the moon cut between the branches, the crunch of leaves sounding like the call of ages as I came down upon foliage that hadn't been disturbed in decades. It was breathtaking how beautiful it was out here, and the further we went, the more I wondered where one would hide a moon elf camp. Glimmer stopped suddenly, putting an arm out to silence me as she listened to something too low for me to hear. Humans do not usually come this far into the woods, but I suppose a human would have to be very special to ensnare the heart of a huntress. Glimmer relaxed, but not a lot. Something came from the woods, moving with all the grace of a hunting cat, and I suddenly wondered why Edward Cullen was stalking us through the woods. He wore leather pants, and not much else. His chest and feet were bare, his arms a rippling tapestry of muscle, but not the sculpted kind, like you'd find at most gyms. This was everyday muscle, like on a farmer or a construction worker, and it looked like the kind that my father would have called slab muscle. His hair was blonde, and it looked like it had been spun from dandelion fluff. Glimmer stood straight, her body turned so as to block me, and she seemed to be working hard not to reach for her bow.
Hello, Grantier. Why does the moon find you in the woods so close to my camp? I would have thought you would have left for your own camp by now.
The moon elf. The moon man? I didn't know, but it smiled at her, though its teeth held nothing but thinly veiled contempt whenever it happened to stray to me. Did you forget, Aurelia? I am an honored guest of Clan Marsific. There is a place by your fire for me, as long as I desire.
Perhaps you should temper your desire then, Grantier.
She continued to walk, pointedly pulling me by the hand as the elf fell in beside us.
We do not require an escort, Grantier. You might return to your hunt.
This was the angriest I had ever seen Glimmer in the whole time I'd known her. It was a little scary. Granther, however, was unfazed. I was returning to camp anyway. 3 by night may move as safely as 2, may they not? She didn't answer him, but when he turned to look at me, his smile was at odds with the hot coals burning behind his eyes. You must be eyes intended. I am Granther Sufafir of the northern camp, the place your people call Michigan. He didn't offer me a hand, and Glimmer had the other hand I usually shake with, so I just nodded, not bothering to correct his pronunciation. That's a long trip. I don't believe I've ever been farther than Virginia myself. Do you do much hunting up there? Granther smiled. Oh, yes. The deer and moose are fine hunting there, and we fish the streams. Have you done much hunting of late? He asked, clearly leading the conversation towards something. No, not really. I usually go to the store if I need groceries. Granther laughed, directing it at Glimmer. I suppose that's where you get your clothes, too, unless you raise some strange animals on your land. These pants are made from a moose I killed last season. Very nice, I said, acting as if I was unbothered by the jab. Maybe if you get another one this season, you can make some boots to match. Gotta be frosty on the feet, wandering through the snow barefoot. Moon elves do not wear shoes. We feel the earth through our feet, and it helps us hunt. Yeah, I had some cousins like that, I said, grinning at him. They used to go barefoot everywhere until one of them stepped on a cactus in Arizona when they were on vacation. Now, they at least wear sandals. Granthier didn't seem to know what to say to that, but I smiled as I heard Glimmer cover a laugh. I don't see what is so funny, he said, his good nature melting away like spring snow. He does not hunt his own meat. He does not make his own clothes. He makes light of our traditions, and he is crass. Why would you wish to? But he had overstepped. Glimmer turned on him, her face very close to his.
That is not your concern, Granthier Sosafir. For your intelligence, he is a magi, one of the wise, and he has fought things that would send you screaming into the woods to change your filthy pants. Go back to your own fire, Grant. Go back and find someone who will return your affection. Because it will not be me, no matter how much you try to discredit my betrothed.
Granthier looked as if someone had slapped him, and when he slunk off into the trees, I couldn't help but wonder what all that had been about. So, is he your brother or something? A cousin, maybe? Seems like he's worried about you and me getting together, so I figured. Glimmer stopped in the trail, and when I bumped into her, her back was hard as stone.
Granthier was the man my father wanted me to join with. He's the son of the camp chief where he comes from, and he thinks that makes him special. It often leads him to let his tongue make trouble for the rest of him.
Oh, I said, our journey continuing. So, he's, what, your ex, I suppose.
If that is what you call someone when they are no longer someone's indeed, then yes.
Understood, I thought. The jealous ex come just to make his play for the lady's hand once again. Well, good luck, buddy. I had a little more to work with than a bow and chiseled abs. We came through a thick set of trees, almost too thick for my backpack to squeeze through, and suddenly we were standing in front of a cave. Appalachia had a lot of subterranean caves, but I'd never seen one outside of a state park. Glimmer went straight in as my headlamp illuminated the slick walls of the entrance, and we descended into the depths.
Praise yourself. It's impressive to outsiders, I've been told.
We came suddenly into an open cavern, and I heard my gasp rise to the roof like a balloon. The cave was lit by glowing fungus, as well as surface openings that seemed to be glassed over somehow. I could just imagine the hikers that happened to look down and see an underground town below them, and it made me chuckle. There were abodes built into the walls of the ceiling, but some of them were on ground level too. There were fires on the ground as well, and a lot of moon elves as they went about their daily lives. The cave was huge, probably bigger than a football stadium, and as we came into the cave, I heard people whispering and the sounds of running feet. "We've been spotted," I said, as a group of kids abandoned whatever they'd been doing and ran to the town proper.
They know we are here. They have known for the last 5 miles or so, I would imagine. The hunters have been out since moonrise, and thought Granthier showed himself to us, most would have simply reported us in the territory and go back to their duties. Come on, let's meet the camp.
She sounded nervous, but also resolved. The lower floors were like a village, with little huts and fires and people tending to both. The elves I could see wore more leathers and hides, as Glimmer did, and their hair was either short or tied into braids to keep it out of the way. They carried knives on belts, a few of them even had swords, but the ones with swords had actual armor, so I figured they must be watchmen or something. As we got closer to the village, one of those in armor came out to meet us, and I noticed hands going to swords as we approached. "Halt, traveler! What's your—" But they saw a Glimmer. First Hunter Marsific, you have come back. This is your betrothed, then, I take it.
I have come to introduce him to the camp.
The watchman parted, and Glimmer stood before the assembled elves like a kid getting ready to give a presentation. She was nervous, her hands shaking a little, but I gave her hand a squeeze, and it seemed to give her strength.
This is my intended. Marcus Carmichael has agreed to join his life to that of the camp. Welcome him as you would welcome me, and give him all the respect you would grant of me.
They welcomed me as one, bowing their heads as they raised their voices, and I waved, a little unsure what to do. Hi, nice to meet all of you. What do we do now? I asked Glimmer, side mouth.
Now we present ourselves to the council and the queen.
Perfect, I said, smiling back like I wasn't completely terrified. Where do we do that? Glimmer pointed to the other side of the cave, where a large, multi-tiered space occupied the whole back wall.
At the palace. Come, we have to make the pilgrimage.
As we set out, the crowd walked with us. We picked up more as we went, and soon the 30 or so had become more like 100. They fanned out behind us, giving us a little room as we walked, and I could feel their presence like a cloud. Why are they following us?
To witness your presentation to the queen.
Ah, of course, I said, nodding as we left the town and walked into the space between it and the palace. Why are they doing that?
It's part of the betrothal. Just go along with it. We'll be there soon.
The palace looked like a tiered honeycomb the closer we got. There was a staircase that led up to it, and I could see a royal assembly at the top. There were more guards up there, and the sight of them kindled something in my memory. That green armor and the bullet-shaped helmets looked like the ones I had seen at the garden, but I didn't think about it too hard. Glimmer's people were numerous, and I'm sure they all had similar armor. I saw some elves in robes at the top, and they must be the council she had talked about. There were 12, but I found myself drawn to a silver-haired man at the end on the left side. His eyes were on Glimmer, and he had a look about him that told me that this was the father I would need to impress. The queen stood near them, and she was resplendent in a flowing gown of silver that sparkled like stars. It wasn't until we got to the top, however, that I realized why the guards had looked so familiar.
My queen, may I present...
The wizard's apprentice, the queen said, looking bemused as she reached out to take my hand. My word, I did not think I would see you again. Where is your teacher? Is he with you? Glimmer was looking at me, dumbstruck, and I grinned a little sheepishly at her. I'm sorry, my lady, but he was too old to make the journey, as much as he wanted to. Had he known we were coming to see you again, he might have mustered the strength to come. The queen laughed, and it sounded like church bells. My people, this is one of the brave wizards who came to the protection of the lady and her domain back when winter attacked. Our casualties would have been many more if it had not been for he and his teacher. He slew one of the Green Men's champions in single combat, an act many saw with their own eyes, and stood strong against the Green Man in the final battle. First Hunter, Aurelia Marsific, is this the one you intend to be bound with? Glimmer stuttered for a moment, finally answering in the affirmative. The queen reached down and lifted her up, bringing our hands together as she turned us to face the crowd. Then you have your queen's blessing. And ours, the camp intoned. Then we are in agreement. The betrothal is confirmed and blessed. A cheer went up, but I could tell from the look Glimmer was giving me that she was not pleased with only now hearing about how I'd put myself in danger and not told her. That look let me know that we would be talking about this, and my answers might depend on whether our betrothal lasted the night.
How could you?
Grandpa didn't think it would be a good idea to tell you, I hedged, trying to get the robe I had borrowed from her father just right. It was white and purple and was a really nice-looking robe. I didn't see a belt, though, and I wasn't sure how to stop it from popping open at dinner. We were getting ready to attend a banquet at the palace, a royal feast for an ally of the garden, and her father had lent it to me so that I would look a little more respectable. "Your clothes are certainly interesting, boy, but we have to get you some finery if you're going to sit with the queen and the other counselors." Glimmer had held her brittle smile until we were alone in the guest room of her parents' house, a snug and spacious cave on the 3rd tier, before she broke down.
"You still should have told me."
"Glimmer," I started, but she cut me off.
"No, by the goddess, you should have asked me to come with you. I'm a warrior. I would have been of help to you. I could have been of help to you. I should have been in that battle. The hunters should have assembled." When the queen and her personal ward returned with stories of combat, I seated. They spoke of crossing swords with an enemy as powerful as the Green Men and of the alias who had been at their side. I should have known it was you and your grandfather. I should have been there. If you had called me, I would have been there too.
"Glim, how was I supposed to do that?"
You...
She started, but stopped as she realized it too. "You don't have a phone or anything. If you weren't in the area that night, then you would have never heard me calling you. Grandpa didn't exactly tell me we were heading into battle either. He told me we were getting ready, and away we went. There was no time for preparation or anything. We didn't know what we were getting into, not till we were there." Glimmer pursed her lips, thinking that over as I found the ties inside the robe and figured out how to not embarrass myself in front of royalty.
"That makes sense, I suppose. But why not tell me when you returned? I'm your companion. You should want to share these things with me."
"I did," I told her, coming to sit beside her on the bed that felt like it was stuffed with moss. "But Grandpa said you'd worry, and I didn't want you to worry. I haven't seen a lot of you since Christmas either. The weather's been bad, I understand that, but before you arrived on the porch, I hadn't seen you in a month. When did I have a chance to tell you?" Glimmer scuffed her bare feet on the floor, a sound that was like stones coming together.
"It has been a trying year. The snow made it hard to get food sometimes, and the hunters came back with nothing on occasion. That was, originally, why my father decided to formalize my betrothal to Grantier. He wanted to negotiate a trade agreement with the northern camps, and marrying the best hunter to one of the chieftain's sons seemed a good way to do it. I may have gotten a little heated when he suggested. I know Grantier was our guest, and have been for most of my life, but I didn't know that was the reason behind it. Finally, my father conceded, and my younger sister was betrothed to him instead. She is only a few years younger than I, so it isn't that much of a difference in age, but Grantier had become quite attached to me. He has set his mind on the idea we would be married, and when my father put forward my sister instead, a scribe and not a hunter, he went to the council to... what would be the word? Press me into betrothal? That's not exactly it, but it's close. He wanted to make me marry him, hence my current hostility towards him. I ended up having to challenge him to combat in order to prove my case before the goddess.
"Wait, you fought Grantier?"
I did. I won too. Some days, I wish I hadn't sparred him though. He agreed to the union between he and my sister, and has been insufferable ever since. That is why I haven't visited in a while. I, too, have had things come up that I should have told you about.
I slid my hand into hers, and she squeezed my fingers back after a moment. "Sounds like we both have a lot to talk about when this is all over." She smiled and laid her head on my shoulder. Her hair was soft as it tickled my nose.
Who knew I was betrothed such a powerful warrior? I hope you will still want to join with that lovely hunter,
she said, trying for a joke, but sounding hurt still. I lifted her face so she could see my eyes. "Only if you don't mind being joined with a lowly college dropout," I said.
I need to get ready for the banquet. Can you occupy yourself while I'm gone?
I thought about it before nodding. I believe I can.
Good.
She kissed my nose before heading out to her own room to get ready. I was looking at myself in the mirror, making sure I had everything just right, when a deep male voice came from behind me. "It looks good on you." I turned to find the very severe-looking elf from the presentation standing in my doorway. He was smiling now, but he still held an air of discomfort. Why wouldn't he, I thought? I was a relative unknown who was coming to ask for his daughter's hand in marriage. Wizard in the Queen's good favor or not, he was still a father, and I was probably overdue for a good shotgun cleaning talk. Except... He stepped closer and adjusted something around the neckline. "There, that's perfect. We haven't been introduced yet. I am Tantalus of Clan Marsific." We exchanged introductions, Tantalus struggling with my name at first and helping me perfect the pronunciation of his clan name so I didn't make a fool of myself later. Then we just stood there, looking awkward, as we tried to decide what to do next. "I've heard tale of your bravery in the gardens. I feel that..." He paused, trying to find the words. "I know you better by the tales my daughter has told me about you and your elder. She tells me that you faced a bone collector before you had fully come into your power. No small feat. How long have you been studying the arts?" I had to suppress a smile. His description made it sound like I was a classically trained actor rather than a fledgling magus. "Honestly, about a year and a half, sir." Tantalus raised an eyebrow. "And you both stood against the Green Man? I cannot tell if you are very brave or very foolish. I will assume it is the former. Your teacher must be very gifted." I nodded. Gramps has been through a lot. I think in some ways he's trying to teach me as much as he can, as fast as he can. It was the first time I had vocalized something like that, and I realized I believed it, but I didn't understand it. Why was Gramps so hell-bent on making me ready? What was he making me ready for? I didn't know, but I thought I knew. What I thought I knew was too painful to think about, however, so I set it aside. It was just a thought, after all. "Tell me about yourself, Marcus. Are you a hunter, a gatherer? Clearly you're becoming a great sage, but what else is there to you?" I licked my lips, racking my brain for something, but finding nothing that might impress my future father-in-law. "I'm a simple man, sir. I haven't always been such an aspiring sage. I dropped out of college, and I haven't had a job in nearly 2 years, but I'm trying to be better. I work the land, I learn from my elders, I collect the stories of my teacher so that those who come after me can know him through those stories. I cannot promise anything as grand as this for your daughter when we join together, but I can promise that my love for her will never wane, and that I will protect her, as well as she protects me." Tantalus nodded, scratching his chin as he digested what I had said. "That is all any father wants for his daughter, for her to be safe and loved. I never felt good about using her the way I did. When the idea was put forward, I decided that a match like that would be as good for her as it would be for us. I thought Aurelia would like having a partner to hunt with, someone to guard her and give her strong children. I failed to see that she was capable of choosing such a person for herself. I'm glad that she was able to remind me in time." I shrugged, a gesture he didn't seem to understand. "You wanted to do right by her. I don't see why anyone would find fault with that." Tantalus shook my hand again, clapping me on the back as he invited me into the outer room. "Come meet the rest of my clan. They will soon be your clan as well, and they are eager to know you." They were all sitting on overstuffed cushions when I came in, and I half expected to see a TV somewhere in the room. Instead, there was a large stone fireplace and shelves upon shelves of books. The space was lit by 7 fungi at the top of the room, and rather than being dank, it was surprisingly cozy. Glimmer had 3 sisters, it appeared, and a mother whom she favored a lot. Tantalus introduced me to Cline, Risha, and Firsta, their ages progressively younger. They all had the silver hair of their patron, though a few of them bore the darker streaks of their mother's raven hair. His wife, Irina, welcomed me warmly, and when the introductions were done, the youngest of them, still 40 years my senior, asked if I could really do magic. I can, I told her, taking a seat on the surprisingly soft cushion that Tantalus offered me. Can you show us some? Firsta asked. Firsta, her mother chided. It is rude to ask a guest such. I don't mind, I said, glad to be able to show my art to someone. Grandpa had warned me about showing it off in front of normal people. He had said something about it being dangerous, especially in the more religious hollers, and I'd felt like a leper as I went about my day-to-day life in hiding. Showing off a little to a group of soon-to-be cryptid in-laws, however, seemed safe enough. Closing my eyes and exhaling, I snapped my fingers and made a Bic's worth of regular fire. I was grateful that Grandpa had showed me how recently, and even more grateful that I could manage it with only a little prep work. Feeling bold, I brought my other 4 fingers to my thumb and lit them on fire too. The group marveled at the trick, and I wondered if anyone in the camp could use magic. This was little more than a parlor trick, but they all seemed pretty impressed. I suppose it could be useful if you'd forgotten your flint and tinder, came a derisive voice from the doorway. The flames went out as my concentration wavered, and Granthier swaggered in with a smirk. Granthier, you are a guest in my home, as he is, so I will ask you not to belittle our guests while here. Granthier ignored him. What else can you do, wizard? What other tricks do you possess? By the way he said tricks, I knew he meant it as an insult. I have wards to protect me from certain creatures of the forest, runes to make myself and other things harder to locate, sigils that let creatures know where my territory is. Do you possess anything that's actually useful, or is it all glamour? Granthier, Tantalus warned, but I put out a hand. I was tired of this guy trying to bait me, and I was tempted to show him the 38 I had in my bag. Smithicus Wessicus. Catch that, why don't you? I can manipulate air currents to create a shield and a column of force. Shields. And what can you stop with them? Softballs, snowballs, the occasional pawpaw that Grandpa hurls at me, which I did not say. Whatever I need to stop, I said, assuming that would be the end of it. Let's see then, Granther said, and he was reaching for his belt before anyone could register it. I saw his hand flick out, and if I'd been a second slower, I would have missed the banquet. Maybe the next few decades or so of life as well. The glimmering shield was in front of me in a second, something I'd been practicing after the battle, and the tip of the dagger was still on the wrong side of the shield. The middle was caught fast in the midst of the current, and the 3 sisters gasped in unison when they finally noticed the hilt sticking out and vibrating slightly. Tantalus did not gasp. Tantalus was furious. Granthier, how dare you—
Granthier Susafir, you dare bear weapons in my father's house against my betrothed and the guest of the Queen of Moons. Had you drawn blood under this roof, the consequences for you and my father could have been dire. You're lucky my beloved is so capable.
I turned to look at Glimmer, and her fury had not diminished her beauty in the slightest. She was wearing a long dress of deep forest green, the fabric looking incredibly soft if I were to touch it. She had her hair up, a braid over one shoulder as opposed to down her back, and her feet were hidden beneath the long flow of her dress. She was beautiful and terrifying as she stared daggers at Granthier. Tantalus told us to go along to the banquet, and we left as he took Granthier by the arm and led him off somewhere else. He was speaking to him in a raised voice as we left, Rena assuring us that they would be on their way momentarily.
He makes me so mad. He won't leave. despite his business being completed, he insists on being antagonistic to a fault.
I looped my arm through hers, and it seemed to give her the same strength I found in the forest. Don't think about him. Tonight, it's all about us. She leaned her head against my shoulder as we walked, the guards stepping aside to let us through. The banquet wasn't a huge event, but it was still the grandest thing I had ever seen. The table where we sat was long enough for all 30 attendants to sit comfortably, and the food was exquisite. There was venison, various roots and fungi dishes, pastries, fruits, wild vegetables, some other things I didn't really recognize. Glimmer had assured me that moon elves had the same dietary restrictions as humans, for the most part, so everything would be safe to eat. There was music and dancing, and the wine was strong and rich and plentiful. Clan Marsovic arrived not long after the second course. Tantalus in his robe of office, and his daughters and wife in various shades of green. Granther came with them, and some of the starch appeared to have been taken out of his sails. He offered me an apology, and I mostly believed it. He sat beside Clinny, the two looking uncomfortable, and as course after course came out, the talk came nearly as freely as the wine. "We have all heard about your exploits on the battlefield, Magus. Is it true that you shot fire from your hand and killed one of the Green Man's champions?" "Well, it wasn't really me, per se. They say you conjured a shield to save the lives of many. How did you manage such a thing?" It's mostly about concentration. You form your will into a solid barrier, and your betrothed had told some of the other hunters you laid a bone collector to rest. How did you manage such a task?" "Well, the wards did most of the work. My grandpa and I, they just kept filling my cup while I talked, telling me almost as many tales as Grandpa. The wine caught up with me, though, and soon it was hard to keep my head from spinning. The elves were drinking it like water, and it was easily the strongest alcohol I'd ever had. I was trying to keep myself from slurring as I told them tales of spirits and creatures, but soon I found myself in Glimmer's arms as we danced in a dizzying circle. Strangely, I felt no urge to be sick, something that sometimes happens when I drank too much. It seemed the elf wine was different in other ways, too.
You're the life of the party, Hunter. They all love your stories, and you seem to have won over everyone.
"Not everyone," I said, looking over her shoulder and meeting eyes with Granther. He was glowering at me, his cup refilling almost as often as mine. Clinny was dancing with someone as we all moved in time, but he seemed not to notice. He had eyes only for Glimmer and I realized that the apology had likely been for Tantalus's benefit, more than mine.
Ignore him. He means nothing, as does his anger. My father told me the two of you had a nice talk earlier. He is quite taken with you. He is something for a scholar himself, and has much respect for men of letters.
"I like him too," I confided. "He seems like a good guy, though I'm guessing he can be serious when he needs to." She nodded.
He was always telling stories of my sisters and I when we were young. A lot of them were what he called human tales that mostly made you all sound like monsters. When I met your grandfather, I think he thought I had made him up. It wasn't until I kept talking about him that he realized I had met a real human. I realized that you weren't the monsters he had made me think you were. You were like us, and that made all this possible.
As the song ended, the two of us spreading to the end of our joined hands, I felt a burning sense of contentment. It was tempered, though, by a sudden need elsewhere. I need to use the bathroom," I slurred a little, looking around. Where do I go for that?"
Leave it to you to know just what a girl wants to hear. There's a room of the main hall where people go do that. Ask an attendant, and they will show you.
I tried not to run as I left the banquet hall, asking a tall elf in a white and green robe about a bathroom. He didn't seem to know what that was, but when I covertly clutched my nethers and told him I needed to make water, something Grandpa had said plenty of times, he seemed to get it. He pointed down the hall and off to the left, and I hurriedly went looking. What I found was a little room full of pots on metal stands. There were about a dozen of them, and from the smell, it was clear that they waited to empty them until they were full. All this, and they haven't figured out indoor plumbing? I said, shaking my head. I probably filled the pot enough for some poor attendant to have to take it out, and I was just finishing up as I heard the door open on the little bathroom alcove. Occupied, or whatever, I said, wondering if the pots were communal. With so many, I guessed they would have to be, but the last thing I wanted was to turn around and see some old elf with his robe open or his leathers down and doing his business. The footsteps seemed a little unsure of themselves as they closed the door, and when I heard them coming towards the place where I was, I sighed deeply. Whether it was urinals or brass pots, there was always some guy who wanted to stand right next to you while you went. Hey, I don't know how it works here, but if you give me a minute, you can have this spot if that's what you want. I stopped talking as the tip of a dagger came to rest against the small of my back. Don't talk. Don't say a moon's damned word. You and I are going somewhere for a private chat. The last chat you may ever have on this side of the veil. You're making a mistake. The knife tip poked at me again, and I shut my mouth. Granthier and I had been walking for about half an hour, and most of that time had been spent getting out of the camp. It appeared that most people within the cave were celebrating the betrothal of their first hunter, and it was easy for Granthier and I to leave without drawing too much attention. He kept close enough to keep the knife on me, and I had very little doubt that he knew how to use it. I wasn't terribly worried about him stabbing me before I could put a shield between us either, which was the only reason I had agreed to go with him in the first place. Granthier was used to being the kind of fellow that those Andrew Tate wannabes would have killed to be, the kind of guy who would have hassled me in high school, and I was ready to show him this wasn't high school anymore. I was tired of being the butt of his jokes, the target of his casual disrespect, and I was ready for the throwdown that was likely to follow. I wasn't 15, acne-riddled, and shorter than him by a head of height and a slab of muscle. I was a wizard, damn it, and I was ready to act like it. Seriously, we're outside the camp now. If I wanted to run or try anything, I would have done it by now. A second, less friendly jab. I sighed, stopping and pushing Will behind me as he walked into my shield, knife first. He bumped against it and stepped back, looking angry and confused at the translucence between us. Seriously, that's getting annoying, I said, crossing my arms and thanking my lucky stars that I had worn the totem Grandpa had given me. This could have been difficult otherwise, and the chances were high that I would have pushed too much power into the shield and blown my wad early, or not put enough in and had a Wilson-style conversation over my waist-high privacy shield. Granthier blew out in exasperation. If you could have done that all along, then why did you let you parade me out in the woods? Because, Chudley, I don't want you to say that I had any help, that I had my girlfriend step in, or bring shame to Tantalus or his clan by scrapping in the palace, something you don't seem to care about much. So if we're gonna fight or something, let's get it out of the way. If you don't mind, though, I think I'll keep my shirt on. Granthier stopped, having been half out of his robe before bringing it back on, without closing it. He looked like a J. Crew model doing an off-Broadway production of Jesus Christ Superstar, and I was not the least bit jealous of his physique. Honest Injun. He still had the knife in his hand, and I was kicking myself for packing the shoulder holster and then not wearing it. I was far from unarmed, but it would be him and that knife against my power, and I wasn't yet confident enough in that power to see that as a fair fight. The fight would last until I ran out of juice. Then he'd simply cut me to pieces. In response, Granthair threw the knife in my direction, but it went wide enough, burying itself in a tree about 15 feet to my right, that I knew he hadn't intended to hit me.
I don't understand any of this,
sending nightbirds into the air.
Why would she choose you? I've been her hunting partner since we were in our teens. I have guarded her back, kept her secrets, defended her in battle, yet she chooses you. I offer a strong union, trade with the northern camp, and the chance for strong offspring, and she chooses someone who does parlor tricks.
I caught myself nodding. He wasn't wrong in a lot of ways. He was the better choice. Even I had been curious why she would refuse him from me. Granthair was the obvious choice, when the alternative was a bookish kid in his 20s. "'Cause we love each other," I said, the only answer I could come up with. "And Glimmer, Aurelia, is capable of making her own choice. She isn't a child, and neither are you. In life, everyone gets to choose who they love." Granthair closed his eyes, running a hand through his brush of dandelion fluff.
"I just don't understand why she won't love me like I love her."
Stood there for a few moments, neither of us really sure what to say, and eventually he went and got his knife and sheathed it.
"I've been too hasty. We should return before we are missed."
I nodded, falling in behind him as we walked back to the camp. Granthair, I was coming to understand, wasn't a bad guy. He wasn't some bully or a mustache-twirling villain just trying to marry Glimmer for her father's land rights or something. He was someone who loved the woman that I too loved, and he was upset and confused that she didn't return his love. "Hey," I said as we came into a small clearing. But Granthair had stopped, crouching into a defensive stance as he drew his knife again. I was confused at first, but when the creature chuffed loudly, I realized we had run afoul of something we hadn't expected. The bear was larger than it had any right to be, the largest black bear I had seen in an age, and when it roared, I took a step back and tried to focus my will on a shield that would stop it. I'd seen Granthair as he prepared to fight, the fool having only a knife against something bigger than the two of us put together, and I was trying to find the words to talk him out of doing something foolish when he lunged at the beast. Black bears are typically skittish. I'd seen them run from dogs a third their size, but this one was possessed of a spine. It swiped at Granthair and dodged to the side as he tried to get his knife in for a strike. The bear's tough hide, its winter bulk still not quite gone, turned his strike away, and he had to drop almost flat on the ground to get away from the second swipe. I had to give him credit. He was nimble, and as he crabbed between the bear's legs and tried to stab it in the flank, I watched in horror as the bear fell on him and covered Granthair with its bulk. I couldn't get a shield in between them, not without potentially bisecting Granthair, and that was when I saw the cause of all this. Halfway up a nearby tree, clinging to the ash-colored bark, were a pair of bear cubs. The bear wasn't a grumpy male looking for a scrap after a long winter, but a mother bear protecting her children. "Stop!" I yelled, bringing my hands together. Something happened then, something I wasn't expecting. A loud crack like a gunshot split the night, and the bear and the elf separated. There was a crater near them, like a small bullet hole, and I wondered if I had done that. No time to think about it then. Right then all I could do was get Granthair away from the cubs before he got himself killed. Granthair rolled away from the bear, his chest slashed and bleeding. He had lost his knife, his arm sporting a nasty-looking bite, and by the way he was breathing, I could tell that at least one of his ribs was broken. He gritted his teeth, preparing to launch himself at the creature again, when I brought a barrier between them. "Granthair, she has cubs!" "What?" he breathed, and I was even more certain that his ribs were broken when I heard him wheeze.
She's got cubs. She'll fight you like a hellcat to protect them. Back up. Let's put some distance between us and her. If we don't antagonize her, she may back down. Come back here with me." He was limping as he backed away, a hand coming to his ribs as he did. Holding the barrier in place, I pushed out with my will as I tried to communicate to the bear that we meant her no harm. I had seen Grandpa do similar to coyotes and strays, but I'd never tried it on something this big. The most I'd ever done was push out at a stray dog and tell him to get out of the road. This was a little more than a hungry dog, but I had to try. The bear was keeping her bulk in front of the tree where her cubs were, settling that bulk in preparation for the blonde man to charge again. She was hurt, she was angry, and now she was distrustful at the push coming from an outsider. Her ears came up a little as I communicated our desire to disengage, to let her go about hers and let us go about ours. And when her stance became less rigid, I thought we might have come to a consensus. She moved off, never taking her eyes off of us, and her cubs soon followed, cute little pair of black bears that I was sure would be terrors of their own before long. "Lean on me," I whispered to Granther, and he grudgingly let me put an arm around him and offer him some balance. We started backing up, my will still sending the message of our intuition to leave her and her cubs alone, and she did not pursue us. I wasn't comfortable enough to drop my shield yet, and as we made our way slowly out of the clearing, I heard her and her small bears making their way elsewhere. "How are your ribs?" I said quietly, preparing to throw up the shield again if she suddenly charged at us. "In screaming agony," he answered, which told me nothing. "Do you know how to get back to the camp from here?" I asked, edging along in the opposite direction of the bear family. "That way," he said, pointing shakily. "Can you walk?" I asked, guessing the answer. "Barely," he growled. "Fantastic," I breathed out, getting a good grip on him so we could start moving. "I fail to see how any of this is fantastic. I took you out here to..." He thought about it. "I don't know, to kill you or scare you, and instead you end up looking like the hero by saving me and bringing me back instead." "It works out like that sometimes," I told him. Aside from the broken ribs, I saw how he was holding his other arm and suspected it might be broken. The wound to his chest was bleeding freely, but the cut was mostly superficial. His left leg was having trouble bearing his weight, not a good sign, and I hoped he was still coherent enough to know which way he was going. "Unfortunately, it isn't quite that simple. You saved my life. Now I owe you that life." "Jesus Christ," I sighed as he looked at me questioningly. "Could you be any more cliche?" "I beg your pardon?" he asked, coughing a little as he limped along. "A life debt? Really? What are you, a Wookiee? I hate to tell you, Chudley, but life debts are usually for sci-fi races. Fantasy races usually have some kind of fealty pledge or something. You're mixing your genres, man." Granther chuckled, coughing like the act hurt him. You are a strange one. I only understand about half of what you say. You will surely drive I crazy. I suppose that might be humorous to watch." He winced, shaking a little as the laughter died in his throat. Damn it, I hoped his rib hadn't punctured a lung or something. "Well, if you want to see it, then you'll have to not die before I get you back to camp. That way, you can tell them I didn't do this to you. After that, I think we can be square." "It's a deal," Granther said, and his breath hissed in and out through his teeth as he hobbled along. "How did you learn to speak with the bears?" "My grandpa taught me. It's not really talking, not really. It's more like pushing your intentions at them,
Bears and dogs and animals in general operate through body language and feelings most of the time. I let her know we didn't want to hurt her or her cubs, and she let us walk away. Foolish. I was so foolish. I should have seen the cubs. I would never have attacked her if I'd known she had little ones with her. You didn't know. You were trying to defend us. Your intentions were noble, but you didn't have all the information. The cave was coming into sight, and I could see lithe forms coming out. Think they're looking for us? I asked him, and as the soldiers approached, I saw that some of them had their swords out. Magus, step away from Granthir Susafir. There were a dozen of them, and they seemed pretty upset by the sight of us. I would, fellas, but he's not in great shape. They could see that, and they didn't seem to like it either. Explain yourself, outsider. Why did you do this? It's against the laws of the camp to do harm to a guest of the camp. If you have injured him in any way, then you will need to surrender yourself to justice. I didn't point out that I was also a guest of the camp, and a quick search of the guards told me that none of them were from the palace. They were constables, beat cops of the cave, and I was coming back from the woods with a wounded moon elf in tow. A moon elf dignitary that did not like me. A moon elf whose betrothed I had recently become attached to. I can see where this looked pretty bad, but I was not in the wrong here and was more worried about getting Granthir some help. He needs a healer or shaman or whatever it is that heals you guys. His ribs are likely broken and he's hurt badly. We will see to that. In the meantime, you need to tell us what...
What happened?
Someone yelled from behind them, and Glimmer was suddenly bursting through the guards. Hey, I said, glad to see a friendly face. Granthir and I, it was my fault, Granthir coughed out, drawing their eyes. I brought your betrothed out here to talk. We came out here to discuss our issues, and we came to an agreement. On our way back, we ran afoul of a mother bear and her cubs. She attacked us, and Granthir tried to defend us. He got hurt. I managed to scare her away, and then we limped back. I pointedly left out the part where he had led me out here at knife point, but no one probably needed to know about that. Glimmer looked at Granthir, the elf nodding weakly, and she got under his other arm as we made towards the camp.
One of you go get a healer. Otherwise, you can explain to the North why the chief so bled out while we did nothing.
They scrambled, some of them going for the healers, while others tried to help us get Granthir in as gently as possible.
We will talk about this,
Glimmer said softly, but she looked relieved rather than angry. Count on it, hun, I said, as the cave enveloped us. Aurelia of Clan Marsific, do you pledge yourself to this man and agree to be his bondmate? I had needed a replacement robe and a trip back to the Marsific home to clean up before the ceremony, but I had made it somehow.
I do,
Glimmer said, presenting me with a necklace that shimmered in the fungus light. It was silver and strung with many precious stones. I didn't know where she had gotten it, and I assumed she had made it. I dipped my head as she set it around my neck, and I looked up to see tears in her eyes. Do you, Marcus Carmichael, pledge your loyalty to this woman and to your adopted clan? My throat closed a little as I tried to answer, and I had to clear it before I could go on. Standing here in the banquet hall before the eyes of the council and the royals, I was a little tongue-tied all of a sudden. Apparently, I can stand against the spirit of winter, but vows of honor and commitment were where my courage faltered. Who knew? I do, I said, taking the ring out of my pocket and holding it out for her finger. It slid on easily, and I was suddenly aware that I had never bothered to size her finger. That could have been bad, but luck must have been with me yet again. Then by the power invested in me by the goddess of the moon and the clan of the Old Woods, I pronounce the two of you betrothed. Welcome to our camp, Marcus of Clan Marsific, betrothed of Aurelia, the first hunter. There were cheers and clapping, none of them louder than the ones from my new clan, and when Glimmer kissed me, I didn't surface for a long time. Tantalus tapped the edge of his stone gauntlet, the hollow sound making the family look up. We were assembled around the table within the clan's home, eating a meal of mushrooms and fish, when he suddenly stood up and raised his glass. "I would like to make a toast to my daughter and her betrothed. It has been an honor to host him here these last 4 days, and we wish him safe travels tomorrow as he returns home." The cups of those assembled rose as well, adding their wishes to his. It had been an interesting few days, to be sure. The Queen had commended me for bringing Garstad back to the camp, and it appeared that my celebrity only rose amongst the elves. Garstad had broken his wrist, broken 2 ribs, and had some nasty cuts and bites, but he would heal, we were assured. Clinny had been spending time in the healer's hut with him, and I was hopeful that maybe they would grow close. When I had gone to see him, he had apologized again for the way that he had acted, and wished me many years of happiness with Glimmer. "She is lucky to have you, and you her." I'd spent some time exploring the camp with Glimmer, seeing the woods, meeting her hunters. I had read with Tantalus, and he had showed me his books and taught me a little of their language. I'd eaten meals with them, heard their stories, and learned their ways, but now it was time to return home. My phone hadn't had signal since about halfway in on the first night, and I was worried about Gramps. "Would that I could stay longer," I said, "but I gotta get back to my grandfather. He depends on me, and I've been away too long, I'm afraid." After dinner, there were goodbyes from the whole clan, and Clinny told me that Garstad had wished me safe travels and good fortune. Tantalus sent me back with a few books and a page he had made by hand of the Moon Elf alphabet. "So you can study our ways and language," he said, clapping me on the back. "Who knows, you might be the first outsider who manages to speak it in over a century." I thanked him, packing the things gently, and before I knew it, it was time to go. 5 days had flown by, and Glimmer and I were leaving out the same way we had come in. I felt the ring around her finger as we walked hand in hand, and the feel of it filled me with happiness.
"It seems you've made quite a splash. I fear every young hunter will want their own outsider before next spring, but I'm sure I will still have the only one who is capable of such enchantments."
"If you don't, then Gramps has been training other young men without my knowledge." She laid her head against my shoulder.
"Even if they do, you will still be the best of them. I fear the Queen would take you as consort if I let you stay."
"Ha! Just let her try. I think you'd put her off that idea pretty quickly."
"You may count on that."
She gave my hand a little squeeze. And that was how I became the first human to visit the Moon Elf camp in the Appalachian wilderness in about 200 years. Glimmer and I had plenty of time to talk on our way home, and we found Grandpa in good health and good spirits. He listened to my story, committing everything to memory, I'm sure, and when the sun rose, he yawned and said he was off to bed. I offered Glimmer a place to stay. I had bought blackout curtains a few months ago, and she found my bedroom suitable for slumber. She stayed with us until the next night, and when the time came to say goodbye, she seemed less than eager to leave.
"I will see you in a few days, my love,"
she promised, releasing my hand jealously. "That's what you said last time," I joked.
"That was before our betrothal, Hunter. I should think you'll become quite tired of me before we were wed."
"Don't count on it," I said, watching her disappear into the woods as the moon hung high overhead. "My bed feels emptier already, but I know now that at least it won't be for much longer. Life in the Appalachians goes on. The seasons change, and we change with them. In some ways, this feels like an ending of something, an end of an era, an end of my life as I know it. But it also feels like a new beginning. Winter ends, spring begins, and spring is always a time for new beginnings." as I lay there trying to make myself tired enough to sleep. I hoped this next year would be full of new beginnings. Hey guys, Dr. Plague here. I just wanted to thank you all for sticking with me through all this, and for so thoroughly enjoying all the Grandpa stories. This will mark the end of the second season of Grandpa, but don't be sad. There will be more Grandpa to come. Of that you can rest assured. The Grandpa of the past and the Grandpa of the now are occupying the same place, and we'll get to see Grandpa return to Appalachia in full form. I hope you'll come back for more great stories with me and everyone who helps me out here on the channel. I just wanted to give another thanks to La Dama de Blanca for being such a trooper through all this. I really leaned a little much on her voice talent this time, and for her help I am greatly appreciative and sorry if I put any strain on her wonderful voice. I'm sure there will be more tales from Glimmer to come, and more tales from our narrator, and more stories of Grandpa. So, come back again for another Grandpa story. And of course, thanks for tuning in. I swear, Gerald, why don't you just go talk to them? It was breakfast time, on their 5th day inside whatever this was, and Gerald was once again staring at the group eating breakfast and happily talking. There were 6 of them this morning, the kid with the red band from the hallway before having become a staple at the table. It appeared that the largest of them, she thought his name might be Diz or Dez, was drawing in others, and a few of the green bands had come to sit with the little girl. Rebecca was half tempted to go over and sit with them too, if it would bring Gerald out of his funk. He'd been quiet and moody since seeing the other blue band, Dunstan. That was definitely his name. And it was starting to bring her down. It was hard to enjoy Twilight for the 7th or 8th time when he was being aloof in the next bed over. "Not time yet," he said, taking a bite of his toast as he watched them covertly. She chewed her eggs as she waited and finally realized she would have to ask. "And what, pray tell, is the right time to go to them?" Gerald turned back to her, something that was rare these days, and sludged his toast through the grits and eggs he'd been eating before. Rebecca shivered. If there was one thing she couldn't stand, it was wet bread. "I have spent the last 5 years following these strings towards something. Call it destiny or fate or whatever, but it's leading me towards something important. When I was 6, I saw my first red string, and I followed it, not knowing what it meant. I was excited. This was the first time I had seen a color other than blue or green or orange." Rebecca found that she didn't believe him as he told her the story of his first brush with danger. Not about the story, but he had almost slipped up and said something when he talked about the colors, and that made her think there might be more than the colors that he had mentioned. She didn't say as much. Gerald was so tight-lipped that any chance to learn a little more about him was welcome, but she filed it away for later. I followed it to my neighbor's house. My neighbor kept dogs, you see, and he'd left the gate open to their pen. They weren't friendly dogs. I think he probably bred them for fighting, but they were asleep, and I managed to creep away before they noticed me. Those dogs got out 2 days later, and 3 of them mauled a toddler who was just sitting in his yard playing. I knew then that the red was like the orange, and I needed to be mindful." "Fascinating," Rebecca said, "but what does this have to do with those kids over there that you keep staring at?" After that day, I never approached anyone that had a red or an orange string attached to them. They were dangerous, they could be deadly, and I gave them a wide berth. Those kids have all the colors I'm familiar with. The string connecting them to me is all wound up, pulsing like neon, and I don't know what that means. I also don't know what meeting them will mean. I don't know if they're friends, enemies, something else, but until I figure it out, I want to observe them and see what they mean to do." Rebecca nodded, sighing as she scooped up more eggs and grits. She supposed that would have to do. For now. You were tossing a lot in your sleep, Gerald said suddenly, and she glanced at him as if wondering what he meant by it. Sorry if I kept you awake. Please, he scoffed. I'm used to being woken up by drunks. I barely noticed you. No, I was wondering if you were having any visions or something. Rebecca started to tell him that if he wasn't going to tell her about his powers, then why would she talk about hers? But she squashed it. He was curious, and it just so happened that she had seen something recently. Maybe all that quiet concentration had helped. Maybe it was just dumb luck, but Rebecca was glad to have something that might help her with the tasks to come. I saw a door, but it wasn't really a door, I guess. She expected him to roll his eyes, but he leaned in closer, prompting her to go on. It had a wheel on it, like in a submarine, and as I looked at it, I could feel something in my head. It was like bugs crawling around inside my skull, and I could feel a high-pitched sound, like an emergency tone, rising up my spine. The walls around the door made me think it might be in this place, and if it is, I don't want to see what's behind it. Gerald was nodding, cruising his third piece of toast through the mush before nibbling on it. Any idea where it might be? Rebecca shook her head. Nope, I've never seen it before. As the clock went off to call them to class, they picked up their trays and went to dump them in the garbage can. Gerald didn't say anything. He was thinking about something, though whether it was about her dream or the predicament with the kids he'd been looking at, Rebecca didn't know. So, she asked, as the two headed for another day of whatever quantified as class around here. I think it's just something we'll have to keep an eye peeled for. And maybe in the meantime, we just stay on guard. Rebecca sighed. Talking to Gerald was always so helpful. Again, Cutter yelled. Dex was out of breath, but he pushed out hard, and this time the dummy hit the ground with a whump. The last two brain blasts had spun it around, but this one was a solid hit straight to the face. It helped to put Dick's face on the dummy when he fired it, longing to wipe the cocky grin off that smart mouth. After 5 days in the boys' company, Dex didn't think he had ever disliked anyone more in his life, except maybe Mr. Gino. Again, Cutter yelled, and Dex felt the blood dribble out of his nose as he fired another one. The dummy fell, but he was getting lightheaded. Before he'd come here, Dex had never tried to do one of these more than once a day, maybe twice in a dire situation. This would make number 4, and when Cutter yelled for him to do it again, Dex wobbled in place as he shot another. It went wide, clipping the dummy in the side, and he fell over as the gym rippled like pond water. 5, Cutter said. Yesterday it was 3. Today you performed 5 before your body gave out. Very impressive, Dexter. Dex sat up, putting a hand to his head. It's Dex, he said, his tongue sounding furry. No one calls me Dexter. Cutter laughed, helping him up and pressing a water bottle into his hand. Fair enough, Dex. He helped him to a bench, yelling at Wayne to get ready as Dex pressed the cold bottle of water to his forehead. They had started their day with exercise, push-ups, jumping jacks, and things like that, followed by a half-mile run. Not a walk, Shrekina, Cutter had said when Cece had taken up some kind of lazy jog. A run! And he meant it. They had run the whole way, Cutter keeping pace before they'd come to the target range and started knocking over dummies. It was only 10, and it already felt like a full day. Ryan came to sit next to him, looking sullen as he watched Wayne struggle to make another of the explosive gusts he created. None of them knocked over the target, but they did hit them. Unlike Dick, who thrust out walls of energy, Wayne pushed out a fan of force. It hit everything in a wide arc, but it was sloppy, and it took a lot of energy. He's gonna yell at me when I can't do it today, Ryan said, watching as he browbeat Wayne for collapsing after the third one. Maybe not, Dex said, watching as Wayne stumbled a little and gained his feet. How does your power work, if you don't mind me asking? Ryan thought about it before pointing to the dummy's head and moving down to the chest. I kind of think about the part I want to affect, and I just do it. Usually it's the head. I give people headaches, nosebleeds, maybe stop their tongue from moving. But he faltered, not quite ready to share that much yet. I don't go lower. It's dangerous to try it on people's organs, and I never use too much effort. Dex nodded, but the thought of this kid's power made him want to shiver. This kid didn't have a gun. He had a bomb. This kid had a nuclear option in his head, and Dex was glad he had stopped the fight in the hall before it got out of hand. As mad as Ryan had been at Dick for living up to his namesake, he didn't want to watch his head pop like a pimple. When you do it, do you push out at all? Ryan shook his head slowly. No, it's more of a targeted thing. Dex nodded. The brain blast was always a push, like when you curl up a fist and punch. He would gather it up, form it in his mind, and then shove it out, thus creating the blast. He didn't know exactly what it did to people. It seemed to stun them mentally as much as physically, but he knew it was always done the same way. Try picturing just the head of the dummy. Not the brain or anything, but just the head. Then push out like you're punching someone. Ryan cocked a head, thinking it over. Think it would work? Ryan, Cutter shouted, Wayne having staggered off to lean against the wall. You're up. Only one way to find out, Dex said. Ryan hopped up, taking his spot on the line as he prepared to try. Dex watched him scrunch his face up, closing his eyes and straining as if trying to take a dump. His lip came up with the effort as he tried to push out, the peanut gallery tuning up. Better grab him another onesie, Dick said. Looks like he's about to mess that one. Cutter glowered at Ryan as if accusing him of wasting his time. If you can't strike out physically, then we'll have to reevaluate your red band status. I don't know what you'd be otherwise. Maybe a white band or a... Cutter missed it, but Dex didn't. The dummy wobbled slightly, about as much as when Wayne thought at it, and Ryan gasped when he realized that he had done that. Go sit down then, Ryan. I'll need to talk to Ridley to see if... Hang on, Ryan said, closing his eyes again and concentrating. Dex thought he could feel something this time, like a forming of something. He thought at Ryan encouragingly, hoping he could hear him, as he pulled in power for another attack. The last one had been a fluke, that's what Dex thought, but this one had intent, and Dex believed it would hit better. Don't hurt yourself, kid. It's a good effort, but if you can't do it, then you can't... He snapped the energy out like a spring, and it hit the dummy in the center of the forehead. The fleshy target fell back, but Dex had seen the skin on the forehead ripple like a wave as it slammed home. He had told the kid he had a gun, but now he thought he might have a sniper rifle. The kid was accurate. The kid had power, and as the dummy hit the ground, Dex was even gladder he had stepped up for him. Otherwise, they would have sent what was left of Dick home in a garbage bag. Holy shit, Cutter said. Very good, right? But Dex looked back from the dummy and saw Ryan laying on the ground. He was breathing hard, gasping like a landed fish, and as Dex made a dash for him, Cutter put a hand out. He was already beside the kid, snapping his fingers and holding the kid's eyes open. Ryan looked like he was having a panic attack, and as his breathing finally evened out, Cutter sighed a deep sigh as he sat back a little. Ryan sat up, shaking his head and blinking very fast, as if trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Dex saw that instead of a nosebleed, some of the veins in his eyes were standing out in accusation, and Dex put a hand on his shoulder as he asked if he was okay. Ryan nodded, still looking around like he didn't know where he was. Cutter seemed impressed with him, though, and when he told Dex to take him to the nurse, the bigger boy trotted him out of the gym in a hurry. As they walked, Dex tried to figure out how to apologize for pushing the kid. This was his fault. He had done too much, and Ryan had paid the price. In a lot of ways, Ryan and Masha reminded him of the kids he'd taken care of, the injured and the deformed kids who didn't have a place to go. This place was like that, except even the weakest of them had no problem taking care of themselves. "Ryan, don't," Ryan said, grinning at him as he turned to look at Dex. "You have nothing to apologize for. You showed me I could do it, and now the rest of them know it too." Dex wanted to be happy about it, but those weird veins in his eyes made Ryan look a little crazed. "And now that I know I can, I want to get better, so no one messes with me again." Dex nodded, not having it in him to smile. "You will. Of that I have no doubt." "So you want me to run a maze?" Gerald said. The little doctor, the one Rebecca hated so much, had taken him from class and asked him to participate in a special assignment. He had spent the last 3 days in and out of Hammershoal's little class, and the good doctor still had no clue what he was capable of. Gerald was pretty sure that he was having trouble measuring his ability, and they wanted to get some kind of data on him. Hence, the maze. Hammershoal twiddled his thumbs nervously, clearly uncomfortable with the question. "It's more of an obstacle course than anything. We're hoping your strings will be able to navigate you on the best path to success, while avoiding the obstacles we've put in the way." Gerald tried not to glance down at the orange string coming off of Hammershoal. The man was dangerous, but no more than the minder who taught the class. At least it wasn't red, like the big man who made the announcements every morning, and that gave him some solace. Hammershoal was probably more of a curious fool than an actual threat, and Gerald was used to that. After all, Mrs. Castleberry had been just a well-meaning fool too in the end. "What happens if I choose not to do this?" Gerald asked. He had already decided that he was going to do it. He was curious to see the extent of his power too, but he wanted to know the consequences of refusal. This was a strange place full of adults who acted like friends, and children who often acted like enemies, and Gerald sometimes felt like Alice as she traversed Wonderland. He'd expected the little man to get angry, but he didn't. Dr. Hammershoal only shrugged, the motion looking comical on his tiny shoulders. "Then you don't do it. I put down in your file that you refused, and we try to find some way to utilize your power. We would like to test your abilities, gain a metric for them, but if we can't, then we can't." Gerald nodded. "Okay, I'll run the course then." Dr. Hammershoal smiled. "Good. I thought you might. I'll be observing you, but don't feel like you have to hurry. Take your time, explore the maze, and find the end at your own pace." Gerald turned away from him, satisfied with the answer, as he set off down the narrow corridor. They would have been claustrophobic for someone like Cutter, but they were just the right size for Gerald. Hammershoal, he thought, could have run quite easily through them, and the thought made him laugh. He sensed that the doctor knew more than he was letting on, and that the powers were something he had once experienced himself. He didn't know the history he and Rebecca had, but he figured she would tell him in time. He came to a crossroad and looked at the strings. One was green, one was blue. Gerald decided to follow the green one for now, and when he came to a set of stairs, he saw a blue string going around the back of them, while an orange string went straight up. He started to follow the blue string, but went up the stairs instead, just to explore. He saw the string stretching up those stairs, pulsing like an infected tooth as it slowly turned red. Interesting, he thought, and as he came to the top of the stairs, he saw an almost comical stone thumper that came down to crash a few inches from his face. Okay, danger indeed. That tracked. Gerald came back down the stairs and followed the blue string to a series of 4 doors. 2 of them had blue strings, 1 of them had an orange string, and the last one had a red string. The fact that he hadn't seen a black string yet made him think that there were some safety measures in place to keep him from dying, but he still wasn't going to take any chances. He turned the knob on the orange door and stepped behind the door as it opened, putting the wall to his back. There was a loud crash as a bunch of junk fell out, and looking at some of it showed him that it could have hurt if it had hit him. He didn't bother with the red door and picked door number 2 as he proceeded. It led him to 3 glass bridges, and he rolled his eyes as he looked down at the padded fall below him. 2 had orange strings leading across them, and 1 had a blue string. Gerald took the blue string and went through the door to find himself in a small room with a computer. At the desk was a small man, smiling as he waved him over. Dr. Hammarskjöld looked pleased with whatever results he'd found, and Gerald found his grin to be infectious. The computer he was at showed a video of Gerald as he went between the little tests, and as he stopped or hesitated, Hammarskjöld would pause and ask him questions. "Why did you choose the left path?" Gerald shrugged. "Seemed like a good idea." Hammarskjöld rolled his eyes. "What color did you see? And please, Gerald, be honest." Blue and green," Gerald answered, deciding to humor him for now. "Is blue always a safe color?" Hammarskjöld asked. "Sometimes," Gerald said. "Blue is a goal color. It isn't always safe," he said, thinking of the blue string that had moved him to the side with his father that day in the principal's office. "But it leads me to my ultimate goal, and that's important." "What is your ultimate goal?" Hammarskjöld asked, clicking pause again as the Gerald in the video came to the stairs. "I don't know," Gerald admitted, "but it's important, and following it is the only way I'd discover it." Hammarskjöld nodded, pointing to the stairs as he watched Gerald hesitate and then go up the stairs. "Why'd you go upstairs first?" "I was curious." "You knew there was danger up there, though." Gerald shrugged. "You told me to explore, so I explored a little." "Like with the doors," Hammarskjöld said, fast-forwarding to the 4 doors. "Yeah. What made you go to the other door before choosing the right one?" "I was curious." "About what?" Hammarskjöld said, clearly tired of the answer. "Was there anything there that could actually kill me?" Gerald asked, surprising the little man with his sudden question. "Well, that thing at the top of the stairs could have crushed you, and that other door had a burst of flame that would... and you would have just let me die." "Well, no, we would have taken you to the infirmary and gotten you help." Gerald got up, and he saw the little doctor get slightly red-faced. Gerald had collected all the data he needed, and he was ready to go. This was becoming tiresome, and he doubted it would benefit him on more than a surface level to stay. "Word of advice, Doc, if you want to test my abilities, put me in some danger. I've lived in a state of high alert for the last 5 years, over half my life, and I barely even flinch at an orange string these days. Very little out there got even a light orange, and that tells me you aren't serious." "Now hold on a second," Hammarskjöld said, throwing himself off the chair and making it spin a little. "Are you asking us to put your life in danger?" "If you want accurate data, then yes. My meth-head father put me in more danger before breakfast than your whole funhouse did. And if you want to get my heart rate up, then you need to get creative, because that was embarrassing." He left then, choosing the door with the blue string running under it, and leaving the doctor to his new data. "What do you think they're testing us for, Dunn?" Dunstan looked up from the ice pop that he'd been working on and shrugged. "Dunno, Dex. Maybe we're super soldiers or something. Well, you red bands are for sure. I guess I'm more here for intelligence work, or whatever they call it. Intelligence is always what they called it in the spy comics." Dex was eating the cone of his ice cream as he watched Masha cross the monkey bars, her face a mess from the chocolate popsicle she'd been eating. These were the times that it was the easiest to remember how young she was, and this girl was a contrast to the little lady who sat with the other green bands and presided over them with poise and grace. He liked it better when she could just be a little girl, a little smiling girl of 6 who just wanted to play and have fun and not worry about weird powers and strange children. "They do seem to be training us for something, don't they?" Dex said,
Just wish I knew what it was. I'm sure they'll tell us when they're ready. It's only our first week here, and there's probably a lot they haven't told us yet," Dunstan said, wincing as the brain freeze hit him. They're just waiting for the right time, I guess." Dex didn't believe that for a second, and when he remembered something Dunstan had said, he decided to ask an impertinent question. "Hey, didn't you say you knew your mom was your mom when you touched her?" Dunstan nodded, but the look on his face seemed worse than the brain freeze. "Yeah, I think maybe she used to be like us. In this place, I mean." "Did she have any info about it?" Dunstan scrunched his face up, racking his brain to try and remember something that might help. The word washout came up a few times. I think that's what happened to her. She didn't pass and graduate, so she became one of these washouts. I think most of the people who grab kids are washouts. When they wash out, they lose their abilities somehow, too, because when I touched her, some of hers came back, I think. Dex raised an eyebrow. "Do any of them know that?" he said, waving a hand in the air to mean he was talking about the royal we. "I don't even think she realizes it yet. Not really. I think maybe the little guy has some power too, Dr. Hammershoal. Sometimes if I brush his hand or bump into him, I get a flash of him talking to people and making them feel better. Some of it was from when he was younger, but a couple of them are from recently. I think he still has some of his power too, though he keeps it under wraps." Dex hummed to himself. Why would he do that? Dunstan rolled up his popsicle wrapper and tossed it in the garbage. "No clue. I guess we still have a lot to learn about this place." Dex nodded. That was for damn sure. Dr. Hammershoal sighed as he came up the hall from staff dining much later. Classes had ended hours ago, but he still had so much to do. He had wanted to be with the Green Bands, the class that he had been in when he was here, but Ridley had been insistent that he oversee the Blue Bands. Despite the minder they put out front, Hammershoal hadn't even bothered to learn her name. He was the real power in the class. Hammershoal made the lesson plans, planned the activities, pored over the data they collected until the wee hours of the night. He supposed it was lucky that he only needed half as much sleep as the normal-sized people. He opened his office and gasped, clutching at his heart as he saw a ghost sitting in his swivel chair. "Jesus Christ! Warn someone before you show up. You almost gave me a heart attack." Security Chief Ridley grinned at the little man, and the effect was ghastly. "Just checking on your progress in Blue Group. Did you get the data on our mysterious power?" Hammershoal waddled in and closed the door. "He's elusive. I don't think he's in the right group." "Oh? Do I need to put him with the meatheads or maybe the brains?" "No, and he'd be a poor fit for the support group, too. I don't think he's seeing any future other than his own, and he doesn't even know what it is." Ridley mused, flipping through the reports. "Doesn't bode well for him. Guess he'd make a good snatcher, but only if he'd play ball." "He won't," Hammershoal said. "He thinks rather a lot of himself. He's very intelligent for a boy you pulled out of a trailer park." "That's what his test scores said, too," Ridley admitted. "What about the tracker, or the boy with the object affinity?" Hammershoal hated the impersonal way he talked about the kids. Ridley only cared about their powers. He didn't give a damn about them as people. They were only good for one thing, and Hammershoal almost hoped that none of the Blue Bands would give him what he wanted in that respect. You never saw the graduates after they moved on, and sometimes he wondered if that wasn't a blessing. Both are strong, both are gifted, and Mark will definitely play ball if you offer to make him a snatcher after he washes out. And the other one? Dunstan might, Hammershoal admitted. Is it true that Janice is his mother? He'd be one of 4 legacies in the whole history of the Black Site. Yeah, but keep that to yourself, Nathan. You and I are the only ones who know, aside from Janice, so
If I hear a little rumor going around, I'll know who to come talk to." Dr. Hammarskjöld shuddered and hoped that Ripley hadn't seen it. He had always been terrified of this old ghoul, ever since he was a kid. It was surprising how little had changed in the last 20 years, and that was almost scarier. Ridley was like an eternally grinning skull set up on a wizard's knick-knack shelf, untouched by time and privy to the secrets of the universe. "Do you have any potential graduates?" Ridley asked, and the little doctor could hear the hunger in his voice. "Too soon to tell," Hammarskjöld said, but he knew he'd said it too quickly. "Don't try to shelter them, Nathan. You know that's why they're here. You can coddle them and change their scores to make me think they're better washed out. But talent always finds a way to float to the surface. If there are graduates in your group, I'll find them." Dr. Hammarskjöld said nothing. He just watched as Security Chief Ridley got up and walked towards the door, looking like he had nothing more important to do than head to the cafeteria for a snack. When the door closed behind him, Nathan Hammarskjöld let himself grip the desk and shudder like a child having a bad dream. He hadn't felt this small in a long time, not since he'd been a child at the state orphanage. He'd known kids twice as cruel as some of these little monsters here, and he'd used his abilities to put some of them out of his path. He'd been a little stronger then, still capable of group suggestion instead of just slight hypnosis. When Ridley had come for him then, he'd thought he was the luckiest boy in the world. Now he knew better, and it seemed the kids who had been watching him with such scorn had been the lucky ones. In a way, he was trapped in that orphanage forever, and it was still Ridley who held his freedom. He just had to make it through this cycle. He just had to make it through this group, and then he could go back to the real world. Ridley wouldn't want him for a while after that. He would forget the little doctor existed and let him go back to treating his patients in peace, making a sacrifice now and again when he found someone the black site would want to know about. If he just kept repeating it, Nathan thought, he could almost believe it. I like exploring. From state parks to virgin wilderness, I love being out and seeing things. I used to go alone a lot, just communing with nature and really roughing it, but thankfully on the day in question, I had someone with me. Jake hadn't wanted to go, had said he had a bad feeling about it, but I insisted. Jake is kind of a shut-in, and I thought that some fresh air and sunshine might help him come out of his shell. Plus, it was spring. Who doesn't like hiking in spring? We were hiking in North Georgia, a state park I won't name so you don't go looking for it. It's beautiful out there. There's a river running through the gorge, places to swim and picnic, rock walls to climb if you're feeling bold, a lot of nature to commune with. We had just come to the end of the usual trail, the river continuing on, even if the marked trail didn't, and Jake looked at me oddly when I didn't turn around and go back. "I want to see what's up ahead," I told him. I had never been beyond that, but I'd always wanted to. "No way," he said. "That's out of bounds. The sign says there are holes or unstable terrain or something." So it means it's dangerous. I know you're all about exploring, Chuck, but I'm not going to die today." "Oh, come on. It's just a little further. Don't be a wimp." He looked like he wanted to go back, but my heckling had gotten the better of him. Just a little. Okay, but if it looks bad, we turn around. Understand?" Yeah, I said, waving him off as I went past the sign and onto the unmarked trail. The signs were needless anyway, I thought. Georgia's swampy in some places, and sinkholes and subterranean caves aren't that uncommon. We'd just avoid the soft areas and we'd be fine. I'd read online that there was a waterfall at the end of the trail, but I'd never seen it. Some hikers said that it was beautiful, that it went all the way back up the cliff, which would be a pretty long drop for a waterfall. I wanted some pictures for my travel blog, and As we walked down the trail, I just knew this was going to be a hike we'd both remember for years to come. I must not have been watching where I was going, because all the warning I got was a little cracking sound before I was suddenly in freefall. I was watching the hole in the ground get smaller and smaller as I fell, and then everything went black for a little while. When I opened my eyes, that circle of light above me was like a spotlight. I groaned as I tested my limbs, my back, my neck, and found myself mostly in good shape. My head hurt, but my arms and legs still worked. I'd fallen onto some moss or something that had probably saved my life, if not my brains, from splattering all over the floor. And as I lay there staring up at the ceiling, I saw a silhouette impose itself over some of the light. "Chuck! Thank God, I thought you were dead. I'm trying to get the Rangers, but I can't get a signal. You break anything?" I sat up a little, rubbing my head where a knot was forming. I felt a twinge of pain in my back, but nothing too bad. I was smart enough not to push it, though, lest I mess myself up further and unrepairably. "I don't know. My back, I think." "Well, that's better than most people if they fall into an underground cave, I guess. Unfortunately, I've got all the climbing hooks and you've got all the rope. I'm gonna head back up to the swimming hole and see if I can get some help. Hang tight, I'll be right back." Before I could say anything, Jake was gone, and I was left with nothing but the moss and the darkness around me. I didn't know how big the cave was, and if it was a cave at all, but the blackness just seemed deep and impenetrable. As I lay there, the pain beginning to seep into my body, I thought I heard something. It was light, no more than a tickle on my senses, but it was definitely something. It was like something with claws, walking quietly on stone, like a rat, but bigger than usual. I thought it was my imagination at first, but as it circled my spot like a shark preparing to strike, I realized I wasn't imagining it. I lay as still as I could, hoping that whatever it was would decide I wasn't interesting or edible. But when it spoke, I was taken off guard. It sounded like a woman, like a young, pretty woman. "Hello?" I stayed quiet, not sure what was going on, hoping it was a delusion or a hallucination. "Is someone there?" It sounded real, though, not like any of the voices I had ever heard in a daydream or a regular dream, and despite myself, I decided to answer. "Hello?" There was silence for several long breaths. Then it spoke again. "Are you from up there?" she asked, and I assumed she was pointing at the ceiling. "Yeah, my name's Charles. What's yours?" Silence. Silence. Then it spoke again. "I don't have one. No one has ever called me anything." That was weird. I didn't know anyone who didn't have a name. Made me wonder how long she'd been down here and who had left her down here. Had she fallen into one of these subterranean tunnels like I had? Had she gotten trapped without any way out? I asked her, but after 2 long breaths, she told me that she didn't know. "I don't remember ever not being down here. It's my home. If I lived up there, it was a very long time ago." The long pause between conversations was a little weird, but I put it out of my mind. Clearly, she didn't get a lot of chances to talk to people, and she was just remembering how to make conversation. There was nothing wrong with that. In fact, I was glad she'd found me. I didn't want to be down here all by myself, and maybe I could help her out once Jake came back. "Why don't you come over here into the light?" I asked, patting the stone beside my moss bed. "That way I can see you." Silence. Silence. Then, "I don't really like the light. It hurts my eyes and it burns my skin." That made sense, I thought. If she had been down here long enough, then she was probably kind of sensitive to light. I remembered reading about people who lived in the dark too long and go blind when you take them into the sun, and I felt foolish for asking. It was really more my sense of vanity anyway. The idea that I might be talking to some old hag had crossed my mind, but she sounded young and pretty, and I guess I just wanted a look. "Is there anyone down here with you?" I asked, hearing my throat click as I said it. My throat was dry, and when I reached behind me, I felt for my water bottle and realized it had rolled off in the fall. I was thirsty. I didn't know how long Jake would be gone. "Hey, you don't see a clear water bottle anywhere in here, do you? There's water in it, and I'm so thirsty." Sitting in the sunbeam wasn't helping matters much, and I was scared to move or go looking for my sunscreen. I wasn't in a lot of pain, but they said that a neck or a back injury could be exacerbated if you moved. I lay there, frying like a fish, and I just knew I was going to have a wicked sunburn when I finally got out of here. When the water bottle rolled out of the darkness and bumped my hand, I had to stop myself from flinching away from it. I reached down, trying to move as little as possible, and as the water hit my throat, it was like pure honey. I splashed a little on my face, imagining I could hear the sizzle, and sighed in relief as I found some comfort from the heat. "Thank you," I said, looking at the darkness as if expecting to see someone peeking at me. Silence. Silence. Then, "No problem. You're the first person I've had to talk to in a long time. I don't want you to lose your voice." I smiled, glad to give her the comfort of a human voice. We talked a little, mostly involving me talking and her adding in little things every now and again. I told her about hiking and Jake, about the world above, and she seemed to enjoy my descriptions of things like TV and movies. For her part, she told me that she had lived in the tunnels down here for a while, and that she could see in the dark pretty well. She ate whatever she found in the tunnels, and I wasn't the first person to fall down here. That made me feel bad for her. "None of them offered to get you out?" "You are the first person to be alive when you fell in. Some of them are alive for a little while, but they don't stay alive for long. No one comes for them, and they succumb to the fall." That gave me a chill. "You mean they die?" Silence. Silence. Then, "They do not find their bodies. I told you, Charles. I eat what I find in the cave." My mouth was going dry again, but it had nothing to do with the heat. She just admitted to being a cannibal, but I suppose one couldn't hold that against her either. She was trapped down here. Food was probably not plentiful. She had to survive the best she could, but I couldn't understand how the Park Service didn't know people were going missing. How did they not collect the bodies before she got a chance to eat them? Did they just think people got lost in the park? I thought that maybe they should be a little more proactive, but then Jake's voice whispered in my head, like putting up a sign to stay off the dangerous trail. "Were you," I tried to ask, my tongue getting stuck to the roof of my mouth, "were you planning to eat me?" Silence. Silence. Then, "Yes," she said, not showing the slightest bit of hesitation, "but you were alive and the sun was up. I usually don't find the bodies till after dark, so there's no sun to keep me away." That made me shudder. It isn't often you get to have a conversation with someone who's planning to have you for dinner. And if the sun had been down and I was still alive, I started, but I couldn't finish the thought. I didn't have to, though. Silence. Silence. And then, "Yes," she said. I was quiet, not sure how to answer, but she beat me to it again. "I have to eat, Charles. All creatures must eat, and I am no exception." "You don't feel weird about eating your own kind?" I asked, trying to find the right words so she wouldn't be offended. Silence. Silence. Then, "I don't eat my own kind, Charles. I eat people." My teeth chattered a little at that. Translation: she wasn't a person. which led my mind to ask the question I didn't dare voice. What was she? What was I down here with? Even if my back wasn't injured, even if I wasn't paralyzed, something I was pretty sure I wasn't, I still had no way to get out. I could no more jump 30 feet than I could have tossed Jake the rope, and I was at her mercy, it seemed. She needn't wait until dusk, I thought, as I watched a cloud cruise across the mouth of the hole. If it started to rain, if it became overcast, even if some stray cloud covered my hole in shadows, it would be nothing for her to snatch me back into the darkness. It was a sobering realization to discover that my life was hanging so tenuously. "Charles?" she asked, and I heard that clicking noise getting closer. "Charles, are you okay?" I hadn't noticed until now, but her voice sounded artificial. It was like something approximating the sound of a voice. A speaker playing someone's voice from a video or something. It was a good copy, but I wanted to know what was making it. The longer I lay here, the less certain I was that she was a girl. The more certain I was talking to a monster. "Charles," she said, and there was worry in her voice, as well as hunger. "I'm here, darling," I said, making myself answer her. I was just wool gathering. I hit my head when I came down, and it made me feel a little woozy." The clicking came even closer to the circle of light, a circle that was suddenly not nearly wide enough. "I do not know this word, woozy. What does it mean? Is it like being tired?" "Yeah," I said. "Yeah, it's a lot like being tired." I kept looking up, hoping to see Jake and the Rangers up there. How long had it been? It had to have been at least half an hour. I couldn't imagine that no help had come in half an hour. Even if he had to walk all the way back to the station at the trailhead, someone should have come along by now. I didn't know if they could stop her from dragging me off and eating me, but I really hoped so. "Charles?" Yeah, I said, hoping my voice sounded steadier than I thought it did. "Are you afraid?" I had to stop myself from answering with a big old Texas-sized hell yes, since that might provoke her. Nah, darling. Why would I be scared?" The clicking came up to the edge of the light, slow and unsure, and I imagined that I could see something there, just beyond the shadows. A face or something. It did not look at all human. It looked like a bad driftwood carving of a strange idol from a heathen tribe outside of civilization, and I found it hard not to stare at the spot. "Your heart is beating very fast. Your blood is pumping through your veins like a river. I can hear it. It's making me hungry. Are you afraid of me?" I opened my mouth to deny it, but that was when someone called my name, and a shadow imposed itself across the light. It felt like too much, and I wanted them to move away as they blotted out some of the light. "Chuck!" Jake yelled. "Are you okay?" "Sure, great," I lied, glancing over to see the face I hadn't seen was gone. Someone else cast a shadow over me, and I was shaking as my light was cut off by half. "Chuck, my name's Ranger Mike, and I'm here to help. Ranger Gabe and I are going to rappel down. Is your back or neck injured?" I don't think so," I yelled, listening for the clicking and the voice of the not woman. I think I just hit my head." Mike talked to someone up there, and they concurred. "We're going to drop down flares so we don't get stuck. Close your eyes, okay?" I nodded, but there was no way in hell I was going to close my eyes with that thing around. It was strange how quickly she had become it, and how little I wanted to bring her back up with me now. I had no idea what I'd been talking to, and suddenly I didn't want to know. I wanted out of this hole, out of this hell, and I promised whatever was listening that I would never scoff at signs there to keep me safe again. If they would get me out of here, I might never even come back to the woods again. The flares came down, and I saw the cave was much bigger than I had thought it was. The flares sent up ghostly light, casting everything in flickering illumination, and that was when I saw it. It was only for a second, as it retreated down a side passage, but I caught a glimpse of what I'd been talking to. The driftwood carving analogy wasn't far off, the whole thing looking white and thin and kind of fragile looking. It walked around on these long, thin legs that looked like nothing so much as pure bone, and its eyes were high up in its bony forehead. It looked at me almost apologetically as it left, but the two rangers who rappelled down never so much as glanced into the cave. They had me up on a stretcher before I could warn them, and after securing it to the ropes, they had all three of us winched up as the flares burned in the darkness below. There were more rangers at the top, paramedics too, and they got me up topside, and I was dragged to stable ground as I was checked out by the EMTs. They said the bruise on my head was nasty, but there probably wasn't any brain damage. My spine appeared fine, though they wouldn't know for sure until I had an EKG, and my neck felt okay too. Ultimately, they said I was very lucky, and I told them they didn't know the half of it. I'm in a hospital room now, waiting for my EKG, but just wanted to get this down while it was fresh. I can't prove that it wasn't a hallucination. The ER doc said I was definitely concussed, but I think it was real. I talked with something under the ground, something that would have eaten me if it hadn't been for the light encircling me. I was extremely lucky in a lot of ways, and I thank God that I made it out with little more than cuts and bruises. If I hike again, I'll be paying more attention to the signs from now on. You never know what you might find just below the surface. Ralph walked a lot, like every day a lot. He had lost his car a few years ago during the pandemic. Not because he couldn't pay for it, but because he had a habit of driving drunk, and the cops took his license after the third time, so it didn't make a lot of sense to keep it. He'd walked ever since, and kinda helped him with his sobriety. He was a bit of a mess before that, drinking a lot, showing up to work hungover, eating too much fast food, but the walking had helped him drop a lot of weight, and had kind of made him not want to drink. Walking while you were drunk was kind of miserable, and when walking was your means of transportation, you got pretty good at avoiding things that left you unable to do it. Ralph was coming into town on Tuesday, walking up the sidewalk that led from the trailer park he lived in to the grocery store, when he saw the first sign. It was a normal enough white sign with big block letters on the top that read "Missing." The thing that stopped him was the face that looked out from the sign. It was a guy of about 300 pounds, thinning hair pulled back in a ponytail, deep bags under his eyes. He looked like a deeply unhappy man, a man who looked like he was just looking for a hole to die in. And if it had a beer in it, then all the better. The eyes that stared out of that poster looked like the eyes that stared from between the bars of a drunk tank. And they had, more than once. Ralph reached out and took the sign, staring into eyes that he hadn't seen in years. He was looking at himself, just a past version of himself, a version 2 or 3 years out of date. Out of date was a good way to describe it, like spoiled milk. Missing, Ralph Gilbert. Address, 9733 Aaron Way, Trailer 17. Last seen, April 23rd, 2023, walking along the shoulder of the road. Call Filibuster Sheriff's Office with any information. Cash reward possible. Cash reward, Ralph thought. It was weird to think that someone would be willing to offer a cash reward for someone like him, but he supposed it was possible. The friends he had now certainly valued him more than that bitch of an ex-wife or either of his ungrateful kids had. More than the family he had left too, for that matter. He put the flyer back up, thinking it was weird that they hadn't just come out to the house to see if he was there. He'd been there for a week after the what, he thought. The night that something had happened. Something Ralph couldn't really remember. He kept walking up the street, enjoying the late afternoon as it dwindled towards dusk. This was his favorite time to walk, he thought. The weather was hot, even for early May, and he spent most days inside due to the heat and the way the sun made his eyes hurt lately. The evening walks were about the best thing for him, and he couldn't wait till autumn came and he could stand to walk during the day again. The last thing he wanted to do was lose his progress. 2021 had been a pretty turbulent year for Ralph, but not all of it had been bad. He had started noticing that the walk was making him lose weight and that he felt better about being more active. It would have been very easy to sit on his couch and feel bad about it. He had certainly done that for a while, but as his food ran out and the money he had gotten from his disability payments started to dwindle, he knew he was going to need to do something. That was how the walking had started. Walk to the grocery store, walk to McDonald's, walk to the 24/7 Phil that he worked nights at, and walk home. After a while, people in the trailer park started to notice that he was walking, and they would offer to pay him so he could walk their dogs. Pretty soon, Ralph had a bunch of mutts on leashes, and he became known as the Dog Man. Soon, people came to walk their dogs with him, and Ralph felt he finally had friends. He hadn't had friends, not since high school, and the ones he had never led him into anything healthy. These guys were walking with him, helping him find the shoes that wouldn't pinch his feet and give him blisters, suggesting pants that wouldn't give him a heat rash. And one day, Ralph hopped on the scales and discovered that he had lost 50 pounds. By 2022, it was 100 pounds, and by the next year, he was down to 180 and feeling better than he ever had. His trips to McDonald's were down to once a week. His dog walking was earning him enough money to keep the bills paid and his fridge filled, and Ralph felt better than he had in years. He had felt like that right up until last week when something had happened. As Ralph came into town, he saw more of the signs hanging on poles and was a little curious as to why no one had come to the trailer park to check on him if they were so worried. He'd been there all week, and they could have come and knocked. Ralph had been kind of out of it the last week, though, and he was worried that he might have caught something. He barely remembered stumbling home after the whatever had happened. Ralph hadn't liked that. It reminded him of being drunk and out of control again. How many times had he stumbled into his trailer after a night of drinking to find that he couldn't remember how he'd gotten there? He sat on his couch, just looking at the dark television, and suddenly he wondered where the groceries had gone. That was when he remembered that he'd been carrying groceries. He'd been coming from the Forest Hills grocer, bags bulging in his hands. He'd come around the corner, Matherson's Curve, and then he didn't know. Something had made him squint, and he thought, oh shit, there goes my milk. Then he'd been walking back into his trailer. As he walked into town now, he saw more missing posters, and it started to give him the creeps. Watching his own face, his false face, looking back at him was eerie, and he wanted to rip them down. He was here. He was alive. Why were they looking for him? He wasn't missing. He was walking up the road. He passed people, side-eyeing them as if he expected them to recognize him, but they just walked right on past without a look back. That was weird, Ralph thought. Yeah, he'd been gone for a week, but people surely hadn't forgotten him that quickly. He'd been sitting in his trailer for a week before he'd thought that a walk seemed like a good idea. It was weird, the food should have run out by now, but Ralph hadn't really been hungry. He'd moved between the living room and the bathroom like a sleepwalker, sleeping, sitting up, like he hadn't done since he was still 300 pounds of lazy couch potato. He hadn't felt like he needed to eat anything either, though, and that was rare. Despite his weight loss, he still managed to have a prodigious appetite. He couldn't even remember drinking water that whole week. Until he'd gotten up to go to the walk, he was worried that he was catching the flu. He had wandered around in a daze, just kind of existing, and it made him feel good when the afternoon had finally called to him. As he walked towards the supermarket, however, he suddenly wished he had stayed home. Sitting in the parking lot of the Forest Hills grocer was a green Ford Focus that became the focus of his terror. It shouldn't have been that way. It was just a car, but there was something about it that made him stop and stare. His legs felt made of lead, and his bowels would have turned to water, except he remembered he hadn't done that all week either. That made sense, he supposed. Nothing going in meant nothing coming out. Right? It didn't matter. After a week of no food or water, Ralph should be dead. And that thought seemed to move him at long last. He was suddenly walking towards the car, his eyes falling on a dent in the front bumper. That was a fresh dent, though Ralph didn't know how he knew that. The door to the car was open, and Ralph climbed into the back seat like a sleepwalker. He sat there, waiting for something to happen, feeling kind of silly. This was stupid. The owner of the Focus would come back and ask him what the hell he thought he was doing. He would call the cops. Ralph would go to jail, and then he'd be in big trouble. Well, he said, at least then they would know where he was. Ralph supposed they could take the signs down if he was sitting in jail. Finally, after an indeterminable amount of time, the owner came out with groceries in a brown paper bag. He was a young kid, maybe 20 or 22, and when he opened the back door, he sat them inside without comment. Ralph watched him move around to the front seat, climb in, and crank the car before driving off. The further they went, the more sure Ralph was that the kid could see him. The kid would look in the rearview mirror, see Ralph sitting in the back seat, and freak out. He might have a wreck, and Ralph would feel terrible about that. The longer they rode, though, without the kid commenting on his presence, the stranger it all felt. Ralph leaned towards the kid a little, meaning to tap him, but as he did, he caught a look at the rearview mirror and stopped. The back seat in the mirror was empty, except for the groceries. That's when he remembered, and suddenly, Ralph wasn't in the kid's Focus anymore. Suddenly, he was back on the side of the road, near the guardrail from Matheson's Curve, and he could see the headlights in his eyes again. The kid was going too fast, hot-rodding around, and his tires had screeched as he hit Ralph. Ralph's groceries had gone everywhere, his milk squishing under the tire and his lettuce rolling under the guardrail. The kid had come out to find Ralph laying across the guardrail, moaning and groaning as he lay dying. The hit had thrown him back, bringing him to rest against the metal rail, and it had broken his back. He had looked at the kid, begging him to help him, and in his panic, the kid had done the only thing he could think to do. He had pushed Ralph over the side of the rail and into the drop below. It was night now, and Ralph was looking over that rail again. He couldn't see his body down there. It had fallen to the bottom and likely been picked clean by scavengers, but he knew it was down there. Ralph would likely go on to be a town legend, someone who had just disappeared one day after making a slight splash and filibuster. But for now, all he could do was look down into the ravine and wonder what to do next. He had read some ghost stories when he was younger, wrote a few of them when he got older, but it wasn't every day that you became one. Something wafted past him on the stray wind, and when Ralph caught it, he realized it was one of the missing posters. An idea occurred to him, and he thought maybe he wouldn't have to stay a mystery. Officer Vermis stood by the guardrail, ready to catch the kid if he decided to make a nosedive. It was pretty high. He might opt for a short flight over a lengthy prison sentence, but Vermis doubted it. The wind pushed his hair just as it did the officer's jacket, and he pointed down almost accusingly as he turned to the kid. "Is this where you pushed the body over?" Vermis asked. The kid, Tyler Machette, nodded before being taken back to the station in the back of a different squad car. Vermis sighed. That was going to be some hard canvassing, but they would find Ralph Gilbert. When they had gone to the kid's house, he had as good as confessed on the spot, and that had made it pretty easy. He was repentant, very sorry, and very young. Some soft-hearted judge would probably not insist on the death penalty for him. It was unlikely he would ever operate a motor vehicle again, not unless the state prison let him run a tractor or something, but he supposed that that would have to be good enough. It was weird, though. The police would have probably never known about the accident if it hadn't been for the tip they had gotten. Looking at Ralph's picture on the front of the poster, Vermis remembered the night he'd taken his license. He'd been a bad drunk, but he'd turned it around, and Vermis hated that he'd ended up like this. It was a bigger shame that the kid had his life ruined by a moment of inattention, but those were the breaks. He flipped it over, looking at the odd writing on the back. It looked like it had been done with mucus, except it was a fluorescent green, like the slime they used to dump on the kids on the show his boys had watched when they were younger. He didn't know what had written it, and he didn't care. They could take Ralph Gilbert out of the unsolved case files and put him in the closed case files, and that was good enough for him. The message read, "Green Ford Focus, dent in front bumper. Kid hit Ralph Gilbert about a week ago on Matheson's Curve. Body in the ravine. Don't let me rot down there." It was all my fault. It had almost cost Felicia and I our lives. Our friend Sandy was having a house party, and we both wanted to go. Sandy threw the best parties, and they usually got pretty wild. The last one had been a real blowout, and we both had a little more than foggy memories from it. Sandy was celebrating her graduation from nursing school, so we all knew this one was going to be a serious rager before she had to settle in to pay student loans. Before we went, Felicia and I agreed that one of us needed to stay sober so we could get home safely. "We don't want a repeat of last time," Felicia reminded me, and I nodded as I remembered how the Uber driver had tried to hold us captive until we agreed to invite him in. Running in heels is never fun, but we had managed it that night and beat him to the door of our apartment. So, we did rock, paper, scissors for it. Went 10 out of 10, and I ended up with the loss. I wasn't happy about it, but I decided that I would do my best to stay sober so we could get home without having to A, get rides from creepy handsy guys, B, get murdered by a stranger, or C, have to take a cab that neither of us could afford. We pulled up to the party already in full swing, and I took a deep breath as I prepared to say no to temptation and be the best sober friend I could be. I lasted all of an hour before I just couldn't hold out anymore. Someone handed me a drink, didn't even ask, and I drank it before I could think better of it. It was one of the very tasty screwdrivers that were going around, so I decided then and there that this would be my only one. I could still hold out. One drink wasn't going to get me. An hour after that, I was completely plastered. Felicia was not pleased when she found me. She had decided to go all in, so now both of us were drunk and had no clue how we were going to get home. We took one look at each other, laughed, and said screw it. We drank way more than we should have that night and had a blast. We danced, we drank, and we mingled our way through the party. And when Sandy waved us out around 2 a.m., we were basically holding each other up. I staggered to the car, but I couldn't even get my key in the door to unlock it, let alone drive. Felicia and I decided that we would just walk home. It was 7 blocks from Sandy's house, but we had no chance of getting a cab this late, and the Ubers would be all weirdos at this point. Felicia agreed, but was basically dead weight after 3 steps. She was ready to sleep and certainly wasn't interested in walking 7 blocks. I was holding her up, looking for options as my own buzz wavered, when I saw a yellow cab parked at the corner. I got excited. It was a little late for cabs, but I wasn't about to question Providence. The light was still on, the guy in the front seat looking pretty awake, and I thought our luck might be turning around as we staggered towards him. I knocked on the window, and the guy with the red hair snugged down under a driving cap jumped as he turned to look at me. He was a big guy, big with fat instead of muscle, and he looked surprised but also delighted as he rolled the window down. He asked how he could help us, and I told him we needed a lift. He asked where we were going, and after telling him the address, I offered to give him a nice big tip if he got us there safely, with no weirdness. "Yes, ma'am, I believe I can manage that," he said with a big smile. "Hop in." So we piled in the back, he turned off his light, and off we went. Felicia was asleep about the time we made the first turn, but I decided to stay awake to make sure the driver didn't try any funny business. We were from a pretty big city, and girls had been going missing pretty regularly lately. You read about it on Facebook all the time. They go out, get a little drunk, and then they're never seen again. No one really knew what it was, but a lot of people thought it was a murderer. It was scary to think about, but I felt a little safer being in a real cab rather than an Uber with some random guy. You never quite knew what the vetting process was on Uber, but I knew the cab companies had to do background checks on their drivers, so at least this fellow was on the up and up. "You ladies coming from a club?" he asked, making small talk as he took his first left. "A house party," I said, trying to be polite. "Our friend was throwing a real heck of a get-together, and we partied a little too hard, I think." "Sounds like fun. Looks like your friend had a little too much, though." "Yeah, she does that sometimes. I was supposed to stay sober so I could drive us home, but I'm not very good at it." "Well, I guess it's a good thing for me, then." I made a non-committal noise and settled back. There was a little holder on the partition with waters in it, and when I reached for one, I saw the cabbie turn to track my movements. He seemed interested in what I was doing, and I held up one of the waters and said one of his fares must have left it behind. It was a shame because my stomach was a little too full of alcohol, and some water would have been really nice. "Oh, those are for my fares. I have a bunch in the cooler in here. I replaced them as needed. Help yourself." I thanked him, testing the seal to make sure that it was still sealed. It seemed to be, but I never got it open. The feel of the wheels beneath me was lulling me to sleep, and I was losing the fight. I tried to stay awake, but I was just too drunk. My eyes kept slipping shut and opening, and as I threatened to go under for good, I heard the cabbie's phone ring. He picked it up, talking to someone, and it was like his whole demeanor changed. There was a very different voice than I was used to. Gone was the jovial guy who had picked us up, and now he was gruff and kind of short with whoever he was talking to. It seemed like a complete flip in personality. "Yeah, I got him. We'll be there soon." I started to ask what he meant by that, but before I could question the statement, I was unconscious. I don't know how long we were out for, but I woke up suddenly, unsure of where we were. I looked around, groggy and disoriented. Felicia was still sleeping beside me, dead to the world and not showing any signs of coming back, and the cabbie was still behind the wheel and driving us home. At least, I thought he was. I glanced out the window, no longer seeing tall buildings and concrete, and I thought he must have taken a wrong turn. We were in the country. The buildings traded for rural pavement and shadowy houses. Everything was dark outside, no streetlights this far out in the country, and I just watched it whiz by for a moment as I tried to make sense of it. I was confused, not sure how we had gotten so lost. Then I remembered the conversation before we passed out. "Yeah, I got him. We'll see you soon." Even in my drink-addled brain, I remembered those words. I glanced at the numbers on the dashboard clock and was surprised to see that we had been in the cab for over an hour. It shouldn't have taken that long to get home. 7 blocks would have been an easy drive this late at night. And as I tried to sit up, I felt something press against my wrist. The unopened water was a cool pressure against my arm. I didn't remember opening it and realized I must have fallen asleep before I could drink it. My vision swam as I tried to come upright, and I blinked quickly to clear it. "Where?" I tried, but my throat was dry. "Where are we?" The cabbie jumped a little, probably figuring I'd passed out like my friend, and when he looked over his shoulder, I heard again the voice of that happy cabbie who had picked us up again. "We're driving to your home." I tried to make his words make sense, but it was like wading through mush. "This isn't right. I live in the city." "You told me 175 Worth Street," he said, tapping his phone in the holder on the dash. "No," I slurred, trying to make my head stop spinning. "It was 751 Worthy Street. We were..." I put a hand to my mouth as hot vomit threatened to come coursing up. "We were only 7 blocks from our house." He put a theatrical hand to his brow. "Oh my gosh, I guess I put the address in wrong. Let me just find a place to turn around and we'll get you back on track." He started tapping at his phone, but I could see he wasn't hitting anything. I was suddenly wary, some of my intoxication ebbing away as he put on a show of trying to get the address right. I remembered those stories about the girls that had gone missing, and I wondered if our names and faces would be on the news tomorrow. Would they think we just wandered off after drinking too much? Would they even look for us? He turned down a side road, saying he was going to turn around, but instead of turning around, he kept driving. I banged feebly at the glass that separated us, telling him he was going the wrong way, but I was so weak. I felt very dehydrated, my mouth dry and my head spinning. I reached for the water, but I thought better of it. I didn't want anything he might give us, and as the top came off, I squeezed it against the little holes that allowed us to hear him. He jumped and cursed, turning around to glower at me as the voice from the phone came back again. "You stupid bitch! I hope you keep that energy when they get you. They'll teach you some manners." My blood ran cold at that, and I let the empty water bottle fall as I looked for other options. I tried the doors, but the child locks were on, and I couldn't get it open. I started to panic. I kicked at the door, at the glass, but each kick was more feeble than the last. I was starting to feel like I might pass out. The cabbie laughed, telling me about all the terrible things the people he was taking me to would do, and my vision was swimming with tears. I bent over and puked in the floorboard, some of my wooziness clearing up as I purged the liquor, but it also left me feeling weak and unsteady. I banged my head against the glass as we finally came to a halt, and I went shakily to the window to see where we were. We were not miraculously in front of my apartment, the whole thing a dream or a hallucination, but in a vacant lot down some country back road. At the end of the vacant lot, perched like a gargoyle, was a white van waiting for us to arrive. As we sat idling, the doors came open and shadowy figures started getting out. I felt my blood run cold as they walked towards us, stopping halfway between as if waiting for the cabbie. I thought again about my car sitting in front of Sandy's house and how I could have driven us home if I had just stayed sober.
"Looks like we've reached your destination," said the cabbie, turning around to flash me a big creepy grin as he slid his seatbelt off. "Don't go anywhere. I'll be right back." And he hopped out to go talk to them. I shook Felicia, trying to wake her up, but she was little more than dead weight. They would get her. They would get me in my current weakened condition. I couldn't fight them off. I could barely keep my head up, and I cried bitter tears in the back of that cab. If I was lucky, maybe they'd just kill us, but I doubted it. We were both likely to end up in some overseas brothel or on the streets of South America, and either prospect was grim. The cabbie shook hands with one of the shadow people, pointing back at the cab and likely telling them he had a couple of half-drunk girls ready for transport. We were in the middle of nowhere. There was no chance anyone was coming to help us. We'd be heading wherever in no time, gone and forgotten, never to be seen again, and there was nothing we could do about it. It appeared, however, that someone had other ideas. They had started walking towards the cab when lights suddenly lit up the back glass. Cars suddenly began pulling up, vans and undercover cars, and people came out then with guns drawn. The men in the headlights of the cab put their hands up, and as they were surrounded and cuffed, they were dragged off to those vans pretty quickly. They took the men away, and that was when they seemed to realize that they had people in the back of the cab. They helped us get somewhere safe so they could get us checked out, and I'm pretty sure Felicia never woke up through the whole thing. They kept assuring us that we were okay, that we were safe, but all I could do was cry. I felt like I had been plucked from the brink at the last minute, and I thanked them with every breath I had. That was how I was almost trafficked by some gang or organization or another. The cops told us the less we knew, the better, and I agreed. I haven't drank since then, and now I'm a permanent designated driver for our group. I take friends of friends home too, sometimes intoxicated women we've met that night, just to make sure that no one goes through what we went through. So be wary if you see a strange cabbie waiting while you're wandering home one night. You may be in for a longer trip than you bargained for. And after we mince our garlic, we put our chicken in the oven on 425 degrees, and while that's cooking, we'll check our potatoes. Margaret's smile felt plastered on, and she could feel her makeup running under the studio lights. She was cooking for a crowd of about 100, most of them on their phones, with probably less than 1,000 paying attention at home. She knew how fortunate she was to get this spot on Channel 12's Something Cookin' segment, but it had barely changed her situation at all. The extra money was nice, but all it really meant was that she had to go to Salome's fine dining at 2 p.m. instead of noon on Tuesdays and Thursdays. She'd been excited at first, hoping someone from a big network might see her, but after 2 years of the segment, it really hadn't amounted to much. "Oh yeah, just look at those potatoes," she said, holding up a bowl for the audience. "Now we'll just give them an injection from today's sponsor." She gritted her teeth as she presented the injector like a game show host presenting prizes. "Archibald Forrest's Hot Cheese Injector. With Archibald Forrest, you can be sure that your family is getting 100% American-made cheese from right here in the heartland. Archibald Forrest, a name you can trust." She slid the needle into the potatoes and injected the soft spuds with sauce. They bulged a little, the cheese oozing out as she slid the needle free. It was enough to make her skin crawl. She hated these cheese injectors.
mostly because they made her think of the big needles she had looked at when she was a kid. She had a lifelong fear of needles, and this wasn't doing it any favors. She was glad when the set person took the tray away, the gleaming chrome injectors making her teeth chatter. She kept her smile in place, though, not wanting to appear rattled by a little thing like needles. Now, those potatoes can go into the oven for 20 minutes, and that should give our chicken a chance to get nice and brown. While that cooks, let's talk a little more about today's sponsor. Archibald Forrest is a cheese company you can trust. For over 50 years, they've been providing quality cheese to the... She fell into the paid segment easily, her mind not on cheese. Her mind was on one of the only two people actually listening to her. They kind of stood out amongst the sea of phones and watchers and bored faces. They wore a suit like an undertaker's, the handkerchief sticking out at the throat of the taller one, looking garish. It was all that looked garish about him, too. While the young one appeared vibrant, his dark skin nearly making him blend into the dimmed house lights. The man beside him looked like a corpse. His skin was pale, his hair fine and platinum, and his smile was too big. She was afraid that it would cut his head in half and send it falling into the seats in front of him at any minute, and their attention caused her to stutter more than once over the product placement. The timer went off behind her as she spoke, and she was glad to turn away as she went to take the potatoes out. Look at those beauties! Bursting with flavor and ready for your table. Everyone here today will be getting a complimentary sample of Archibald Forrest's Hot Cheese Injector, a $25 gift, yours free today for watching this segment in studio. The lights for applause came on, and they put their phones down long enough to clap half-heartedly. The old corpse's hands sounded like bones coming together as he clapped for her too. She kept smiling as the lights baked her, and when she invited the cameras to return to the studio, she sagged in the lights when they went up. She set the potatoes down a little harder than she strictly needed to, and walked off set in a flurry of apron and no-slip shoes. She had to get out of the sight of those two, the corpse especially. They had both been interested in her, but the eyes of the old guy had been downright predatory. "Great show today, Mags," J.D. said, coming around to catch her up. She raised an eyebrow at him, not sure why he was here. Jamie Darling was her agent, and he wasn't a very good one. He'd got her this gig and a few guest spots on other cooking shows. That was about all he had managed in her 10-year career as a semi-celebrity chef. "You just don't have brand recognition, Mags. One of these days you'll get there. Till then, just put your time in," he'd always say. "Please tell me you have something," she said as she headed for the dressing room. Her dressing room had started life as a broom closet, and Maggie could still smell the cleaners that had once lived here. She stopped outside, knowing they would be nose to nose if she invited him in. That was a little more intimate than she wanted to be with Jamie Darling, and they both knew it. "I do, as it happens." His smile was nearly as large as the ghoul's had been, and he seemed quite happy with himself. "I got you a spot in the preliminaries for the Food Network's new chef showcase. It's no Iron Chef, but it's a place for chefs to make a name for themselves, and they agreed to accept an audition tape from a one Margaret Schaefer." Maggie had to admit that was pretty good, and the hug she threw on JD was legitimate. "Oh my God, JD, this is huge. This is how guys like Emerald got their start. If I could do well here, I could leverage this into a line of cookware, or a show on the Food Network, or a spot at a celebrity restaurant, or even..." "Pump the brakes, shooting star," JD said, laughing at her excitement. "It's just an audition. There's some serious competition here, but I think you got a good shot. These are mostly no-name chefs, guys who are cooking short-order stuff or catering kids' parties. You helped Salome earn that Michelin star that she's so proud of showing off, and I know you can wow the judges here, too." Maggie smiled. Thanks, JD. When's the tape due? He sucked air through his teeth. That's the bad news. It's got to be in by Sunday to qualify. Maggie's anger flashed up like a grease fire. Sunday? That's only 3 days. I don't know what I'm going to cook. I don't have any ingredients. I don't. JD put a hand on her shoulder. Don't sweat the I don'ts. You figure out what you need, and I'll get the supplies. You can pay me back when you're a big star, right? He said with a wink. She nodded. Okay, I'll figure it out tonight and send you a list. We can do this. I know we can. She reached into the dressing room and grabbed the hanger for her apron, taking off her cook's whites too and trading them for the grease-stained ones she wore at Salome's. Now, however, I need to get to work. Till I'm famous, I've still got bills to pay. I need 2 steaks for table 2, potatoes au gratin and asparagus. Yes, chef. Maggie directed the kitchen as her brain ran in overdrive. House salad and Catalina for table 7. Oysters and clams. Table 6 is going out now. Something with pork or beef, she thought, as she chopped vegetables and prepared broths. I need a lamb and rice for table 9 and a porterhouse medium for table 9. Broccoli spears and mashed potatoes. Yes, chef. She had decided on pork as she went into the middle of the dinner rush and was constructing her ingredients when she saw the two enter the restaurant. She was standing in the door of the kitchen, watching the food go out as she caught her breath before going to prep the beef for the next rush. She saw them walk in and take a table near the wall, finding menus and bending over them studiously. Even bent over that plastic rectangle, she could still feel him looking at her. He was peeking, side-eyed from across the glossy surface of today's specials, and she shuddered as she ducked back into the kitchen. A few minutes later, Gabriella came back in with their order. Be careful with these, she said, her voice low and a little afraid. I think that guy at table 16 might be a food critic. He makes jokes and smiles a lot, but he just has an aura about him. I don't like it. They want 2 porterhouses, potatoes au gratin and broccoli. How do they want their steaks? Maggie asked, patting Dave as she took his place on the grill. If this was a critic, she wanted to get out in front of this, so he'd have the best food and the most expertise possible. The younger guy wants his medium, but the other guy, he wants his steak rare. Maggie shuddered, but here at Salome's, the customer was always right, and it was hard to mess up a rare steak. 20 minutes later, Maggie took the plates out herself, telling Gabrielle that she would take them to the table. To her surprise, Gabrielle seemed relieved. Thank God. Every time I go to refill their drinks, that guy's eyes creep me out. His smile looks unnatural. She closed her eyes as if trying to find the right words, and she finally settled on that one. Maggie took the plates out to the pair, and when she sat them down on the polished wooden surface, the man with the strange eyes looked up at her expectantly. I don't like being hounded, gentlemen. I assume that's why you followed me here. So why don't you tell me what this is all about? The skeletal man looked at her, his smile growing wide as he turned back to the dark youth. My name is Richard T. Seraph, and this is Lucifer Jones, my assistant. Pay no attention to him, however. He's learning the trade and is mostly here to observe. The reason I've come here today is to talk about selling your talent. Maggie looked at him oddly. My talent? Mr. Seraph indicated an empty chair at the table, and Maggie took it, keeping a safe distance from the pair. They were like bookends, a pair of undertakers out on the town, and had he just said that boy's name was Lucifer? Who would saddle someone with a name like that? Clearly not this one. He was wide enough to be the father of Snow. They did make an interesting contrast, however, and Maggie was interested to know why they were following her. Yes, your talent, he said, taking a business card out of his coat. Libris Talent is looking for all kinds of talent these days, and yours would be a fine addition to our growing catalog. This Wasn't quite what she had expected. She had expected a fan. God knew she had enough letters in the studio, but this sounded more like another agent's attempt to scalp her for their agency. She had heard of things like that happening, but she thought it was something that only happened in movies. Surely they weren't here for her, but what if this was her big shot? Okay, so what exactly are you guys? Are you talent agents or something? You could say that, Mr. Seraph said. Our business is talent. We pay people for the talent they may not be utilizing to its fullest extent. People like me, she asked, bristling a little at the comment. You think I'm wasting my talent? Is that what you're saying? Lucifer smirked a little, looking away from Mr. Seraph to hide it. Clearly he thought his boss had erred. We see that you are using it to the extent of your abilities, but it could be better served. Let us pay you for it. And she stood up, the man cutting himself off abruptly as he glanced up at her. I think we're done here. I have orders backing up in the kitchen, and I need to get back to work. His hand came out quick enough that she was worried he would hurt her, but in between his fingers was a business card. In case you change your mind, the value of your talent is on the back. Just something to think about. Maggie wanted to walk away, but she found herself taking the card and putting it in her pocket. You should eat those while they're hot. Once they get cold, the taste is wasted. Then she turned and went back to the kitchen. They left sometime later, returning nothing, but Maggie had put the enigmatic Mr. Seraph out of her mind for now. She had decided on her dish, and as she left for the night, she was already texting JD a list of things that she would need. If she was going to be ready, she was going to need everything to be perfect. And as it comes out of the oven, we see the magnificent fruits of our labor. The crown roast is perfectly crisp and ready to serve. She flashed a smile that was anything but pasted on this evening, and as she signed off, JD clapped in that slow, deliberate way of his. If they don't accept you after that, then they are utter fools. Think I can get a taste of that crown roast? It was all I could do not to yank it out of the oven early. Maggie grabbed a knife, plating some of it so JD could try. It was a good recipe, easy to make, but worth a decent price at some upscale restaurants. Hopefully it would impress the judges enough to secure her a spot in the contestant pool. As she tried a little bit of it for herself, even she was impressed with how it had come out. You cook like this on the show? JD said through a mouthful of meat, and you're a shoo-in for the top spot. I hope so, she said, thinking about what winning something like this could mean for her. She wondered suddenly if she should tell JD about Mr. Seraph. Would he be mad at the man for making such an offer? Would he call him up and tell him that he had her under contract? She didn't know, but she guessed that he wouldn't be very happy, and she didn't want to spoil the mood. I know so, he said. Your cooking is next level, Mags. I think you'll be hearing back from them once I send them this tape. That's what you said about the cook-off last year, though, Maggie said, remembering her third-place trophy. That was a total snatch job. I'm telling you, that lady had to have known someone. Your brisket chili was the best one there. I should know. I sampled all of them. Tasted like she was using plain ground beef with no style or substance. This is different. This is the chance you've been waiting for. Maggie nodded, putting her past failures out of her mind. This was going to be her moment. Okay, let's take this home and polish it up a little. I want it to look amazing when I send it off. Not too much, she hedged, knowing JD's habit for going overboard. It's just a cooking video. It doesn't need too much polish. He waved a hand at her. Don't worry, I'll get their attention. Mark my words, they won't be able to ignore this video. He left shortly after that, and Maggie hoped he was right. Maggie really wanted this to be her moment. JD sent the video off Saturday afternoon, and Maggie was a nervous wreck all of Sunday. She could be seen running the kitchen from the back of house, chain smoking by the back door as she glanced at her cell phone. They wouldn't render a decision this soon. It would probably be next week, and She just knew that she'd be on pins and needles the whole time. Monday came, and Monday went. Tuesday saw her regretting making the video in the first place. What business did she have making a video for something like this? She was no master chef. They would see that, and they would pass her over. No, JD had been right. This was her chance. She needed to stay positive. She was going to make it. She was going to be on the show. She was going to take her shot. As she sat drinking wine in her apartment after work, she looked at the business card that she had left on the coffee table. Libris Talent was printed across the front in bold black letters, with Richard T. Seraph printed below it. She had honestly forgotten it until she reached into her pocket for some change on Monday night. She left it on the table, not really wanting to touch it. She hadn't looked at the other side. She didn't want to know what the offer was. JD was doing okay by her, and she just needed to stay the course. By Wednesday, she was ready to chew nails and make staples. She was dreading Thursday as she got ready for bed on Wednesday. How was she going to cook for an audience with this hanging over her head? It was Summerfest tomorrow, and she'd be making mostly sides to go with her Hawaiian burgers. The sponsor was Sweet Hickory Barbecue Sauce, and she already knew that it would clash with the taste she was going for. Didn't matter, though. They had paid for the spot, so their sauce would be going into the marinade. She was brushing her teeth when someone knocked on her door, and she could see JD looking contrite as he stood on the front porch. She opened it slowly, curious to know what he was doing here so late. "Just figured I'd give you the news in person," he said, sounding a little disappointed. He was shuffling around like a cartoon character, and it would have been funny if the news didn't seem so dire. "Well, out with it, darling," she said, putting her hands on her hips. The mischievous smile that broke her lips told her all she needed to know as the clouds parted and his smile was once again radiant. "They loved your submission. They want you on set next Tuesday." Suddenly they were both dancing around like a couple of girls at a sleepover, and Maggie's fears and megrims had melted away. "You might want to tell Channel 12 that they need an alternate, because it sounds like you're going to be busy for the next few weeks." She realized he was right, and decided to type up a little something to give the stage manager tomorrow when she got there. It was short notice, and they probably wouldn't like it, but she knew that they would support it. If she came back and picked up the segment again, it would do wonders for viewership. Even if she lost and was forced to return to her normal existence, people would watch to see the woman that had been on the chef showcase. She said goodnight to JD, thanking him for all his help, and when she turned in that night, she had a polite letter of intention typed up and let them know that she might need someone to take over her Thursday spot. She dreamed of winning it all that night as she drifted off, but as she cooked for the celebrity judges, there was the ever-present shadow of the smiling man in the black suit. He watched from the audience, his eyes boring into her, and in her dreams it made her clumsy. She dropped things, she spilled broth, she cut her finger with a knife as she chopped vegetables, and her happy dream became a nightmare. She woke up in a cold sweat, promising herself it wouldn't be like that. Next Tuesday would be her time to shine. She was all aquiver as she stood beside the other 12 contestants for the first stage of Chef's Showcase. It was Thursday, and she just knew that Mary Schuyler, the girl who got to run the cooking segment when she was out, was bungling through the handmade crab rangoons they were making today. When she had announced it at the end of the last episode, the audience had actually stood up and applauded. There had been no grinning specters in that audience, and her contemporaries on the network had wished her well in the competition. Management hadn't been terribly happy with her, but she had agreed to wear the Channel 12's apron with something cooking emblazoned on it, and that soothed them a little bit. They had agreed to let her out of her contract for the length of the contest, but made it clear that they would expect her to fulfill her contractual obligations when she returned, no matter the outcome. Tuesday had been all about shooting promos at the backstory part of the show. She had talked about cooking with her mother and her grandmother when she was young, cooking her way through culinary arts school, losing her grandmother before graduation, and then getting on with Salome's and helping them succeed. It was a beautiful story, not as tear-jerking as some, but still pretty sympathetic. Now they all stood together, ready to be set to their tasks as the host, Conrad Beasley, introduced the panel of judges. All three were well-known chefs, but Maggie was more concerned with what the first dish would be. "Your first challenge, chefs, will be," and as he yanked the cloth back, Maggie let out a sigh of relief, "lamb. You'll have your choice of veggies from the garden box and 60 minutes on the clock. The theme for this dish will be backyard barbecue. And begin." Maggie scampered to get the ingredients along with the rest. Backyard barbecue, she thought, as she grabbed the greens and the tomatoes. Maybe a chutney or some lamb cut thick and served as steak. She was picking up onions when she thought about a burger, and the recipe came together in her mind. Before she knew it, she was grinding the meat into patties, cutting potatoes for fries, and getting everything ready for plating. The burgers cooked up quickly, the cheese melting and the onions caramelizing, and as the ingredients came together, Maggie found herself glancing up at the audience. She was terrified that she would see him there. She had seen him in her dreams for the past 4 nights, but that didn't mean that he would be there. He wasn't following her. She knew it was all nerves. She heard something pop in the pan and realized her medium rare burgers were edging towards medium. She pulled them out and plated them, looking up to find that she had about 15 minutes left before the presentation. She put the fries in, plating the burgers before working on presentation. She added a toothpick, but took it out. She weighed the options between sesame buns and regular, and ultimately decided on seedless buns. The fries came out just as the clock hit 5 minutes, and Maggie had plenty of time to get them plated before time was called. She smiled at her food, standing at the ready as she watched the host. She was still watching the host when she saw something move in the gallery where the audience sat. It was a shadow, nothing too out there, but when it moved, it drew her eye. It was moving between the people, it seemed, the shadowy audience looking strange as they waited in hushed anticipation. They had called the first contestant, but she couldn't focus on whatever he was talking about. It was as if the whatever it was had been moving to get a better vantage point. It was as if it were moving to see her better, and as she stood sweating in her cook's whites, she could feel those familiar eyes on her. "Let's welcome our next chef, Margaret Schaefer, to the stage with her lamb burgers." Maggie felt her teeth chatter as she watched the shadow, not sure what it was, but knowing who it was. "Margaret!" She snapped back, nearly stumbling as she turned to the host. "Would you like to show us what you've made?" Maggie glanced back at the audience, but the shadow was gone. "Yes, it's my take on lamb chutney. It's a medium rare lamb burger with oven fries and a..." But as she walked, she happened to look up. He was standing up now, grinning down at her with his too big grin, and she did trip this time. The trip was a good cover for her shriek, but the food was not so lucky. She caught 2 of the plates, the third going right into the lap of the middle judge, Chef Randolph McManus. He grimaced, looking at the mess in his lap, and suddenly her eyes were full of tears. Shit! She had messed it all up. This was it. There was no coming back from this. Not only that, but she only had 2 plates of food to offer now. She would fail the challenge, no matter what she said. "Excuse me," she sobbed, running off stage before anyone could stop her. She was running all the way to the green room, but that didn't seem far enough. Before she knew it, she was in her car, crying into her steering wheel. She'd blown it. She couldn't go back to a TV spot either, because dollars to donuts, this would all go viral by tomorrow. Some stagehand or some audience member would have gotten the whole thing, and before she went to bed tonight, there would be memes and tweets that had been turned into clips on TikTok with the most unflattering music they could find. She wasn't even sure she could go back to the restaurant. Who would follow her after she had messed up so badly? She'd be a joke, a laughingstock, and if she did go back to her cooking show, it would be as a public spectacle. She reached into her pocket for tissues or napkins or something, but what she came out with was the business card of the man that she had been so afraid to see. She stared at it for a while, not sure she wanted to flip it over, but after a while she did, and her eyes went wide. She put it down, her hands shaking so badly she was afraid she might rip it. What was that number? For her talent, he had said, but what did it mean? Was it a job offer, a sign-on bonus, or something else? She looked at the front of the card. She wouldn't know unless she called. The number came slowly as her shaking fingers pressed the buttons, and it rang twice before someone picked up. Libra's Talent, Lucifer Jones speaking. She was silent, not sure how to begin, but apparently they had been waiting for her. Miss Schaefer, is that you? She jumped, startled that they remembered her. Yes, she finally said. Have you called to make arrangements for your talent? I have, she said, before she could think better of it. Stupendous! Mr. Seraph is making arrangements to meet you at your home for a demonstration this evening. We are very interested in acquiring your talent for our growing roster. Will tonight work for you? Her teeth were chattering. Maggie didn't want that old ghoul anywhere near her house, but she knew that if she hoped to get the sum on the back of the card, she would need to show him what she could do. That kind of money could help her put some distance from this town. From people she knew who wouldn't let her forget her slip-up. The laughter wasn't what scared her, not really. What she couldn't stand would be the looks of disappointment. J.D. would be disappointed. So would the staff at Salome's, and she couldn't stand for that. She would want to leave, to go somewhere where they couldn't find her, and the money would help her with that. Yes, tell him I'll see him tonight. My address is, we know all about you, Miss Maggie. We'll be there, 7 p.m. sharp, so make sure you're at home. He hung up on her then, leaving her sitting there with the phone against her ear, and a deep sense of dread running up and down her veins. What exactly had she agreed to? She didn't know, but she supposed she would find out. When her phone rang at 6:45, Maggie jumped a mile. She had been drinking wine in her living room, trying to get in the right headspace for what was to come. She had been right. Someone had leaked her little mishap today, and it was trending online pretty hard. She had seen it on TikTok, on Facebook, and had been sent a couple of them by J.D. earlier in the evening. Her slip had been set to Benny Hill music, Thriller, some song by Blood on the Dance Floor, and a slew of other things. The comment section had been brutal, and Maggie was in a state. She'd been trying to put it out of her mind so she could get ready for tonight, but when the phone rang, she was afraid it would be her mother or one of her cousins who wanted to laugh at what a klutz she was. It wasn't, though. It was J.D. Mags, why didn't you call me? This is great. We can totally... I messed up, J.D. I didn't want to talk to anyone after that. I dropped food all over McManus. McManus! I'm surprised he didn't cuss me right then and there. Maggie, you're looking at this all wrong. You're a viral sensation. We can spin this. I don't see how. I'm off the show. I can't go back to Channel 12 as a laughingstock. I may not even be able to. Who said you were off the show? She stopped for a moment, JD's words washing over her. What? Roger got kicked off this episode. He made this awful stink about not using animals in his cooking and made a hummus instead. He got disqualified on the spot. And once the judges tried your burger, there was no chance you weren't going on to the next round. Maggie stood up, careful to set the wine glass down so she didn't drop it. Maybe there was a chance to salvage this. She was going on to the next round. There was still a chance to make something of this. She could still win. She could take home the prize, and all anyone would talk about in the end was the meme. Someone knocked on her door, and Maggie realized it was 7 o'clock. I gotta go, JD, she said, hanging up on him as he tried to squeeze out a few more ideas. She went to the door, and there he was, smiling at her as he stood on the stoop. He still looked like an undertaker, and she still found herself afraid of him. But as he came in to sit at her table, she found that she could tolerate him for a little while. It seems that fate is trying to draw you to me. I keep seeing you everywhere, and I'm tired of it. He just smiled his enigmatic smile and took a book from his coat. It was huge, like the family Bible her parents had owned, but it was anything but holy. The outside was thick and cracked, the leather ancient but still soft as calfskin. It looked like it might bite if you put your hand too close, and he opened it to reveal a list of names within. He took a silver pen from the inside of his coat and handed it to her with a little flourish. She looked at the pen dubiously, not sure what he wanted. Do I sign that? Is that some sort of contract? More of a pact. Sign your name and receive your compensation. It really is that simple. Maggie took the pen with trembling hands, setting it to the page as she prepared to sign. She was still a little hesitant to get anywhere near that book, but as she signed her name and laid the pen inside, she looked up expectantly. Okay, now what? He pulled out another book. She found to her surprise it was a cookbook. Open it, and let's begin. She chuckled a little, realizing her name was on the book. I don't see what this has to do with... But as the book came open, Maggie felt her breath leave her. It was like phantom fingers rummaging through her mind. They were using her like a Rolodex, taking what they wanted and leaving her mind empty and violated. She could see the empty cookbook filling up, and as it snapped shut, another took its place. Maggie felt those phantom fingers taking everything, lifting her most cherished parts, but she was powerless to do anything but stand there and let it happen. As the third book took its place, that's when she noticed her hands. Her hands had begun to prune, like someone who'd spent too much time in the bath. As the fourth book appeared, she found that she couldn't even feel it. When the fifth book took its place, she was growing weak. She filled up 10 in all, and Mr. Seraph seemed well pleased when she finally blacked out. Worth the price, as I'd known it would be. That's where JD found her the next day, lying on the floor of her living room, her hands shriveled and useless. When she hadn't arrived to shoot that morning, he had gone straight to her apartment to make sure that she hadn't done something drastic. She was so upset after the day before that I was worried she might have done something stupid. Now I don't know what to think. The hospital didn't have a clue either. Her hands bore signs of nerve damage, and she was completely unable to hold anything heavier than a pencil for the rest of her life. What was worse, she couldn't remember anything about cooking. JD worried that she might have hit her head or something, but Maggie knew what it had been. Mr. Seraph had taken all that away and paid her handsomely for it. No one ever questioned how she had become a millionaire overnight, but the money helped ease some of the sting. She was careful with it, careful not to live outside her means, but it never became an issue. JD helped some. After the social media circus around her fall, the actual media circus around her story was big news. JD helped set up interviews, got her news spots, and even got her a spot on several talk shows. Maggie was a small celebrity, but she was always careful not to mention Mr. Seraph. She had some vague idea that no one would take her seriously, and the people who would could be dangerous. She told them it was some kind of sudden spontaneous nerve deterioration, something the doctors had floated, and they seemed to like that idea. A year later, Maggie was sitting in New York at one of those fancy restaurants McManus owned when he came out to her table to say hello. She was a little starstruck when he came swaggering over, the tall and muscled chef that everyone seemed to live in fear of, and when he smiled from under that thick mustache, it put her at ease. Think nothing of it, darling. I knew I had to come say hello when they told me you were here. What brings you to New York? I've got an appointment at some clinic, some new procedure that they think will give me some mobility again. It won't, but some kind of benefactor is paying for it after hearing my story, so I could hardly decline." He laughed. He had a good laugh. "Well, you must let me make you something. It's the least I can do. You made me something the last time we met." It was Maggie's turn to laugh. "Yeah, a mess. I'm so sorry. That was unintentional," she started, but he waved it off. "Think nothing of it, darling. I tried it after you ran off. Bloody tasty. Let me make you something to return the favor." She thanked him, and 30 minutes later, he was bringing her a plate of meatloaf with carrots, peas, mashed potatoes. Maggie raised an eyebrow at it. It was a little simple for a place with 4 Michelin stars, but she couldn't complain. Maggie hadn't even been able to cook eggs after that night, and the woman she had hired to cook for her usually just made fancy dishes. This reminded her of home. Her hand shook a little as she lifted the fork, but her hands always shook these days. As she put the first bite in her mouth, she tasted something she hadn't in a very long time. This wasn't just any meatloaf. This was her grandmother's meatloaf. Baba had taught her to make it before she died, swearing her to secrecy on the exact recipe. At least she had, before Mr. Seraph had taken it from her. "Glad you like it," McManus said. "But then again, that burger wasn't the only thing you made me, was it?" She watched him return to his kitchen, wanting to be mad, but only finding tears. She cried into her meatloaf as she ate, knowing it would be the last taste of Grandma's meatloaf she ever had. The lights were hot overhead, the buzz of the crowd sounding like insects outside the bright lights. Rain sat resplendent in his colorful robe and scarf, looking like a swami in some 1940s movie. There was a man beside him in a cheap suit, his bald head bowed a little as if asleep. A guy with a smile like a Crest commercial, who looked like he should be selling used cars, and a girl who didn't look old enough to drink, who appeared to have tripped into a Hot Topic and blackened her eyes and her credit card on the way out. Then there was the host, a man that even Killian would have known by sight. Harry Klein had been doing this kind of schlock for years, and in all that time, his act hadn't changed much. "Harry, Harry, Harry," the crowd chanted as the lights came up for applause and the audience went wild.
"How the hell did they like to talk me into this?"
Killian asked as he sat squinting in Rain's head. "Because we're friends, and friends help each other." Killian made a non-committal noise.
"No, couldn't have been that."
"Oh, shush," Rain said. "She'll be coming out any minute, so be on your toes." Harry raised his hands, shushing the crowd with a practiced grace that was somewhere between a disc jockey and a megachurch preacher. Harry Klein was wearing his signature leisure suit, cobalt blue with the flag pin front and center, and his gray hair was swooped into something that made it look even more like a wig. For a guy who had to be pushing 70, he didn't look a day over 45, and when he smiled, it caught the stage lights just right. Harry was a sleaze, but he was a sleaze with 2 daytime Emmys and a bucket full of charisma, to be certain. Very few men his age could still pull the 18 to 35 crowd out of their hungover stupor like Harry Klein could, and he damn well knew it. Killian had been on his show once, a long, long time ago, and he was glad to see that he had gotten rid of that awful couch that he and Don had sat on. Welcome to the show! Today, we're talking about the hereafter and what lies beyond the mortal plane. When Grandma passes away suddenly, or Uncle Lou dies before he can make amends, where do you go for closure you so desperately crave? Why, you go to one of Atlanta's premier psychics, that's where. Men and women who can communicate with the dead and tell you if Gram died peacefully in her sleep or if Uncle Joey finally smothered her with a pillow. Lastly, we have a special guest, a psychic who needs no introduction, so we won't spoil the surprise until the time is right. The audience chuckled and clapped as Harry moved on to the Beetlejuice extra in the corset.
So, which one of these guys is your rival? Because I can tell you flatly that the only one with agency backing is sitting right next to you.
Killian knew Randall Morgan, had helped him once or twice with information, and as Harry tried and failed not to stare at the girl's sizable endowments that the corset was barely holding in, he glanced up at Rain and winked. He knew Killian was there, but he supposed he hadn't thought a spot on the Harry Klein show was worth charging up debt with the agency to secure a ride-along. "Really?" Rain said, looking impressed. "I didn't know Randall had that kind of pull, but no, none of these guys are my rival. Most of them are psychic hotline levels of threat to me. They can do little more than read people and guess. David Schwepp is a dime store John Edwards, and Gotharella over there is a talented tarot reader, but that's about as far as it goes."
So who are we here to size up then? Because I've got work to do that this is keeping me away from.
It wasn't technically a lie. Killian had some cases he could be putting in time on, but most of them were easy stuff. Routine haunting that needed closure, a woman looking for her husband in the hereafter so she could move on, a lost wedding ring for a ghost with unfinished business. Stuff that wouldn't take long. What he really meant was that he had better things to do than be on a talk show he had rolled his eyes at while he was alive. Harry Klein had been pulling this crap since the 80s, and Killian could remember turning to Dom more than once and telling him to turn this crap off. Klein was the kind of host who would do paternity tests and send kids to Scared Straight camp, though he did a lot of trade in shock stories as well. It looked like that hadn't changed much, Killian judged, as the woman in the corset claimed to channel spirits through more sensual means, and the audience made scandalized noises as she blew them kisses. "There's no way that would work," Rain scoffed, but Killian could hear him questioning the validity of the things she was clearly toning down for the program.
The only way to channel spirits is the way you're doing it right now, Rain. At least as far as I know.
"Never have I been more envious of the dead," Harry said, eliciting applause and catcalls from the crowd. It was a big day for them. They got to go to a show, get out of the trailer park for an afternoon. Better than a trip to Disney for most of these guys, Killian thought. "Don't you dare touch that dial, because when we come back, we'll be talking with David Schwepp, who claims to charm the dead from the graves. Just ask him the time of day. Coming up next on Harry Klein." The audience clapped as the cameras panned around, and Harry put his smile away as he tromped backstage. "Good to see you, Killian," Randall said, turning to Rain and offering a half-hearted smile. Rain cocked an eyebrow, trying to make it look questioning, but coming off as more suspicious than anything. "Morgan, are you going senile? It's me, Rain. We've known each other for..." Rain shuddered as Killian came forward. The old ghost had too much respect for the wrinkled medium to pretend, and when Rain shook his head, Killian felt himself smile from the depths of his familiar veyance.
"Good to see you, Randall. How's business?"
Randall shrugged. "Not as good after my second heart attack. I just can't take on spirits anymore. It's made my work more show than real." Randall had been an agency favorite for some time, but Killian didn't think he'd seen him in a while. The heart attack answered that question. Once the body started breaking down, it was harder to tolerate having spirits inside of you. Killian had never used any of his vayances roughly. Well, not on purpose at least, but he was sure that one of his contemporaries had likely been responsible for Randall's current state.
"I hope things turn around for you. I'll tell Carol you said hi."
Rain blinked a little as Killian slid back into his head, and as the music started up again and Harry came back to the stage, he turned back to look across the audience. "You know I hate when you do that," Rain thought at Killian, as Harry moved on to the handsome fella sitting beside the gothic hottie.
"Sorry. Randall's an old friend, and I wanted to say hi.
Killian continued to look around, still interested in this rival of Rain's.
So who's this rival of yours? Are they a special guest or something?
The audience laughed, and Rain looked over at the handsome fella in the suit as he talked about singing to the spirits to get them to come to his call. He sounded a little like Bing Crosby, but his Rat Pack aesthetic looked a little dated, even to Killian. He did a little number, the crowd eating it up, but Killian didn't feel moved one way or another. As the crowd stopped clapping, Rain told him, "Oh yeah, just you wait. She's a real bitch." Harry went to break again, the crowd chanting his name before he moved off to get his hair and makeup teased a little more.
Oh yeah? What's she done to get your goat?
Rain crossed his arms, seething a little as Randall turned to talk with the Bing Crosby wannabe. "Not only has she been stealing my clients, but she talks crap about me and my services too. She calls guys like Morgan and me fakes, compares us to party clowns and magicians, and I'm sick of it. When she comes out, I want to show her that she isn't the only one who can channel spirits, and wipe that smirk off her face for good." Killian nodded. It was a pretty good plan, if it worked.
And you're sure she isn't some kind of boogaboo like we saw in Vegas that time?
Rain made a sound that did not kindle confidence. "I mean, if she's predicting with any sort of accuracy, then she has to be using a spirit like you, right?"
Right.
Killian wanted to put his mind at ease, but he knew there was more to it than that. Some people could just see the future. Some people had senses capable of reading someone just by body language or personality. Hell, some people were actually creatures from the other side using human forms. It was a big, wide afterlife out there, and Killian was really only a small part of it. As the light swiveled towards Randall and Rain, Killian squinted inside the man's head. The music came up, Harry moving his chair down as he came to sit with them. He offered a hand to his guests before settling in for a chat. He was powdered, freshly coiffed, and Killian was pretty sure there were tracks of blow under his left nostril. Powder of one sort or another, Killian supposed, and hey, it was showbiz, after all. "We're back with the otherworldly speakers and those who communicate with the dead. Randall Morgan has been a buckhead psychic for as long as I've been on the air, and Rain Dupree has been a staple in the medium community for years. Gentlemen, welcome to the show." "Thanks for having me, Harry," Randall said. "Thanks for paying twice my usual rate," Rain said, drawing laughs from the audience. Harry didn't seem too put out by the remark. It was just how showbiz was. "So, you two claim you can speak with spirits?" "Oh, I don't claim anything, Harry," Rain said, grinning as the camera panned around to focus on him. "I can speak with the dead." The crowd chattered quietly, but Randall decided not to add anything as Harry lifted an eye at Rain. "Oh ho! Well then, how about a demonstration?" Rain smiled, leaning back with his arms folded as he seemed to think it over. I don't know, Harry. I'd need someone to contact. Maybe a volunteer? Maybe even you." The crowd clapped at this, and Rain thought at Killian. "Could you?"
You sure you want me off my leash here?
Killian asked, and he felt more than heard Rain's gulp. "Just be nice. I'd like to get invited back again." Suddenly, Rain leaned his head back, his eyes going white as his mouth went slack. It was a position that Killian had always thought of as the movie medium activation, and when Rain sat back up, Killian was in the driver's seat. He smiled with Rain's mouth, glancing at the sea of faces, and prepared to do his stuff.
Hi there. Name's Killian. I was once a detective in this city back in the day.
The audience nodded and whispered as they talked amongst themselves. Wait, Killian Barger? I remember you. We had you on the show once, back in '83, wasn't it? When you were working with Wit. I believe he's still there, isn't he?
He is. And as I recall, it was one of your viewers who called in to help us with the case we were working on that show.
That was a lie. The tip had actually come from some random spotter who had called them after seeing the news story. But Killian thought it might buy Rain some brownie points with their host. Right. It was the case of all those missing kids, right? That was nasty business. Did they ever find those kids? Killian felt a chill run up his spine as he readied some quip to fire back. Yeah, he had found those kids, but it hadn't done them any good. In the end, the bad guys had gotten Killian. The kids were spirited somewhere beyond the law, and Killian was ushered somewhere beyond his mortal form.
No, we never did. I died trying to find them.
The audience made some undeniably apologetic sounds, and Killian slipped out of Rain's head and let him have the wheel again. Rain sat up, covering his surprise with a look of shocked return as the audience applauded. Harry told him that was quite a show, and Rain told him that the powers of the dead were no mere parlor trick, as Killian drew his hypothetical knees up to his chest and tried to breathe. The nightmares kept showing their face again, the creatures that had taken them, the cold feeling that had been around him, and it all sunk in like frostbite. When Harry moved on to Randall, Rain reached in tentatively for his friend. You okay?
Yeah, never better.
Randall was saying something that had Harry laughing, the audience joining in, but Rain seemed to be muffling it some so he could talk to Killian. The two had become closer over the years, and Killian knew that Rain considered him a friend, as much as Killian considered the other a friend. They'd been to war together, Rain sometimes unwillingly, but it had made them close. I didn't know you'd been on the show before, or I probably wouldn't have asked you to come. God, I didn't know you had been on here right before you... But Rain wasn't able to finish, so Killian did it for him.
Before I died? You can say it. It's just death. It doesn't hurt me anymore, Rain. It happened, and I'm okay with that. Now then, let's get ready for this rival of yours.
Rain nodded as Harry said something about their special guest. She doesn't think much of guys like you and Rain. She says what you do is little more than a party trick, and that people should stop wasting their money on fake psychics. Well, Randall said good-naturedly, I suppose she's entitled to her opinion, though I don't think she's in any position to throw stones, if you're talking about who I think you are. Let's meet her then, shall we? Atlanta's premier psychic, fresh from her appearance on the Oprah Winfrey Show. She's been a consultant for stars such as Amy Winehouse and Barry Ford. From her office in the dazzling Atlanta Sky Center, Donna Frost. The audience went wild as she came out, and whatever Killian had been expecting, it wasn't this. A woman in a modest pantsuit walked out, her long platinum hair set in a braid down her back. She walked onto the stage and took the good mood from most everyone in attendance. Even the Crosby wannabe looked like his casual air was slipping as she took the empty seat and folded her legs into an interesting cross. She was the kind of woman that Killian knew most would call a girl boss, but that wasn't what had him worried. She wasn't someone he knew, but there were spirits around her. Miss Frost, welcome to the show. She gave Harry a wintry look to go with her icy smile. Well, when your people call me no less than 100 times in the last week, how could I say no? There was laughter from the audience, but Harry's smile looked a little brittle. Well, who else could we want for a segment on Speakers for the Dead? I understand you've been busy lately. A new client, perhaps? Donna laughed. Harry, it's a poor psychic who kisses and tells. I've been providing legitimate psychic consultations to the area for the last 3 years, and I think the people I help consider me a breath of fresh air next to the shysters and pretenders you've assembled here. Shysters? Rain bristled. Ma'am, I don't believe you have a clue what you're talking about. I can't speak for anyone here, but I'm no pretender. She smiled indulgently. I'm sure you've tricked yourself into believing your own hype over the years, Renard, but we both know what services you offer is little more than a parlor trick and smoke and mirrors. Really? Rain said. Would you like to make a bet on that? Harry turned back to the audience. Looks like we have a real showdown coming up, so don't you dare touch that dial. The audience chanted as the camera panned around, and as they went to commercial, Harry turned to the two of them with a bitey-looking grin. If you two are intending on having some kind of showdown, just don't break anything, okay? I've already got your waivers, so you're liable for anything you two wreck. Then he stomped off towards the backstage to get a water, or have another line of blow, or whatever it was he did back there. You might want to rethink getting in my face, Renard, Donna said. I know you have some power, but I am way out of your league. Rain scoffed. Oh, please, I've been doing this since I was a kid, and I can smell a faker from a mile away.
Rain.
You strut out here in your pantsuit and your bad dye job, and you expect us to roll over. But I got news for you, Missy. You aren't as clever as you think you are. Not by...
Rain.
Killian said it a little louder this time, and the man flubbed his line in the middle of his little speech and growled angrily into the depths of his head. What?
She's not with the agency.
Perfect. Then she's a faker.
No, she's not.
But you said...
I know what I said, but believe me when I say, she's something different.
The spirits around her were not, Killian observed, like any spirits that he had ever seen. They were small, crystalline things that flitted around like snowflakes, whizzing here and there as they came back with information from Miss Frost. They whispered into her ear, told her what she wanted to know, and then shot off towards whatever lay beyond. Killian had never seen anything like it before, and the idea of spirits or familiars or whatever they were kept like this was a little unsettling. Every day seemed to present a new way for Killian to learn just how much worse his eternity could be. So what are you saying? Rain asked, some of his bluster gone.
I'm saying that if you go toe-to-toe with her, you'll lose. She doesn't have to work within the bureaucratic framework that I do, and she'll win if it comes down to it. Whatever those things are that bring her information, they are better at it than I am.
Much better, Miss Frost said, and Killian realized she could hear him. Rain, you naughty boy, don't you realize that relying on agency spooks won't get you more than a handful of juicy gossip? Rain was as startled as I was. You can hear him? She shrugged. Not really, but my frostlings can. You are cut from the same cloth, detective. They too were once far too nosy for their own good, and that curiosity led them to become trapped in my thrall. She got up then, and Rain flinched back a little as she towered over him. She just laughed. Relax, Reynard. I didn't come here to hurt you or anyone else. I just wanted to see the competition. Enjoy your business while you can, because within a year I will take everything you have and cast you aside like an old toy. She left then, Harry seeing her go and moving after her as he tried to get her to come back. What the hell was that? Rain asked, barely whispering inside his own skull, like he thought she might be listening.
She just threw down the gauntlet, Rain, and in a big way. If you mean to keep your head in this game, you better be ready to play.
Killian knew it wasn't just Rain who needed to be ready. As he watched the frostlings move like dust motes around her, he knew the agency would want to know about Miss Frost and her ability to control the dead, something that lay outside of agency means.